Chapter 232. Boom. Cercopithecus was sent flying like a cannonball, plowing out a gully that was dozens of meters long. Its back was badly mutilated. A clear trace of a whip could be seen. However, it quickly stood up again. Cercopithecus no longer felt pain. The badly mutilated wound looked hideous, but it did not matter to Cercopithecus. As long as its head was not damaged and its body was intact, it could fight forever. It charged toward the three-headed serpent again. Hiss! The three-headed serpent that had sent Cercopithecus flying was hovering high in the air. Its head was as high as a two-story building. When it saw Cercopithecus charging toward it again, its head spat out red stamens. Cercopithecus' attack just now had severely injured its red head, causing it to bleed profusely. At this moment, it finally felt fear. After the fear, he was completely enraged. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. A huge fireball, burning with raging flames, whizzed out like a falling sun. The soil floated up and turned into hard cone-shaped rocks. Like a torrential hail, they shot out in unison. A huge green wind blade, which looked like it was made of green metal, slashed out as fast as lightning. The three serpent heads began to use their abilities at the same time. It was different from ordinary blood fiends. It had mastered 3 types of blood fiend abilities. When it fully activated its abilities, it did not activate one blood fiend ability or increase the power of one blood fiend ability. Instead, it activated all 3 blood fiends' abilities at the same time. Through the superposition of the 3 blood fiends' abilities, its power became even stronger. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Seeing this, Gray's expression turned grave. Without hesitation, he activated his plant abilities to the maximum. Huge vines appeared from all over the forest. They intertwined with each other and weaved into green wooden walls in front of Cercopithecus, protecting Cercopithecus. At this moment, his plant abilities had been raised to the limit, reaching the level of brute level. Of course, this was only temporary. This was caused by the maximal stimulation without regard for consumption. Not long after, it would immediately return to its original strength, and in the process, a large amount of blood energy would be consumed. But now, he couldn't care less. He did not dare to bet that Cercopithecus could withstand such an attack. Even if it meant blocking part of the attack for Cercopithecus, that would be good. Poof, poof, poof. Under the combined power of the 3 types of blood fiends, the walls made of vines that were harder than steel were easily destroyed, broken, charred, and reduced to ashes in the raging flames. Flames were a natural counter to Gray's plant abilities, not to mention the fact that he also had earth and wind abilities. The wall of vines was easily broken, and the abilities of the 3 blood fiends spread forward. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds. An extremely exaggerated scorched mark that extended over 100 meters appeared. Even though Gray had used the power of plants to the greatest extent to block it, it still had such power. If it hadn't been weakened by Gray's plant abilities, how powerful would it have been? Hiss! Hiss! The 3 heads of the 3-headed snake looked in the direction of the destruction, looking for the enemy that had been engulfed by its attack. Soon, it found its enemy. At the end of the black mark, a sorry figure appeared. Its whole body was black and full of burn marks. Not a single part of its body was intact, and it emitted a charred smell. On its abdomen, there were 2 huge wounds that almost split open its stomach. Those were the damages caused by the wind blade from before and the wind blade just now. At the same time, its 2 huge arms were almost charred. This was caused by the fireball that hit its head when it used its arms to protect its head. Hiss! Seeing its prey in such a miserable state, the 3-headed snake's huge head arrogantly revealed its sharp fangs. From its point of view, Cercopithecus had completely lost its ability to resist and had become its food. It couldn't wait to devour the food in front of it. It began to slither towards its prey. But at this moment, whoosh! A green glow floated out from the surrounding plants and quickly enveloped Cercopithecus, enveloping Cercopithecus entirely and turning it into a green cocoon of light. The 3-headed snake stopped slithering forward and looked at Cercopithecus cautiously, its eyes full of caution. Blood fiends all had their own skills. For example, the three-headed snake had used 3 types of blood fiend abilities at the same time. At this moment, from its point of view, Cercopithecus should be using its skills to fight for its life. The plants in the distance were quickly drying up, making the three-headed snake even more cautious. After a while, just as it was about to lose its patience and was about to launch a probing attack, whoosh, the green glow disappeared, and Cercopithecus was revealed. Then, all 3 of its heads fell into a daze. The food that had been roasted so fragrant just a moment ago was actually as good as new? How could this be? Thump, thump, thump. Cercopithecus stood up and charged towards the three-headed snake. Accompanied by violent vibrations, it quickly approached the three-headed snake. Looking at the restored Cercopithecus, the three-headed snake's eyes were full of fear. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this moment, a large number of plants grew crazily, wrapping around its body. In order to prevent the plants around the three-headed snake from being sucked dry, Gray lurked about 100 meters away from the three-headed snake and used his reverse nurturing ability. Whoosh! The three-headed snake swung its tail at the vines. A large number of vines were broken, but more vines wrapped around it. Its 3 heads quickly swung out like 3 huge whips sweeping across. A large number of vines were broken and sent flying again. It raised its heads to look for its enemy. At this moment, boom! With a loud boom, a huge body that was 7 meters tall suddenly leaped up to a height of more than 10 meters and landed on top of the red snake's head. It hugged it with one hand and hammered it with the other. While it was dealing with the vines, Cercopithecus had already closed in. Boom! Its huge fist hammered the snake's head again and again. Its fist, which had been restored to its original state, was once again badly mutilated. It had the three-headed snake's flesh and blood, as well as Cercopithecus' own flesh and blood. The red snake's head struggled violently. The other 2 heads opened their huge mouths and bit Cercopithecus' body. Venom was injected into Cercopithecus' body, but it was useless against Cercopithecus, which had no blood in its body. The thick snake's tail continuously whipped Cercopithecus' body. Bloody marks appeared on Cercopithecus' back one after another. However, Cercopithecus had no intention of letting go. It held the red snake's head firmly in place with one hand. Its fists were still hammering down without stopping. The three-headed snake fell into a state of fear. It was afraid of attacking one of its heads, so the other 2 heads did not dare to use their blood beast abilities. Crack! Suddenly, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. The fiercely struggling red snake's head suddenly fell limp and stopped moving. Scarlet blood flowed out continuously, accompanied by a white substance from the snake's broken head. The red snake's head had been completely destroyed by Cercopithecus. With the red snake's head destroyed, the other 2 heads were completely enraged. They immediately used their blood beast abilities. Rocks fell like hail, and huge wind blades, which looked like they were made of metal, attacked Cercopithecus at the same time. Poochie! This time, Cercopithecus was finally sent flying, plowing out a clear trail that was dozens of meters long. Many wounds appeared on Cercopithecus' back. One of the wounds was a huge gash that was deeply cut into Cercopithecus' flesh. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Even so, the other 2 heads, who had completely gone berserk, had no intention of letting it go. Once again, they used their blood beast abilities without hesitation. Puff, puff, puff. Countless vines appeared, blocking in front of Cercopithecus. Although the vines were eventually pierced through, they had been greatly depleted. The remaining power fell on Cercopithecus' body, but it only added a few more insignificant wounds and sent Cercopithecus flying more than 10 meters. The three-headed snake had 3 abilities. Among them, its fire ability had a stronger restraining effect on Gray's plant ability. The other 2 abilities did not have such an effect. This was also why Gray wanted to control Cercopithecus and let Cercopithecus destroy the red snake's head first. Hiss! One of its tongues fell limp. The remaining 2 heads spat out their pistols in the direction of Cercopithecus. Anger and fear pervaded its body. It was angry that it had suffered such a huge loss, and even one of its heads had been destroyed. It was afraid of Cercopithecus's combat power and terrifying recovery ability. Thump, thump, thump. At this moment, Cercopithecus, which had been sent flying, got up again. Its movements were not affected at all. Without hesitation, it flew toward the three-headed snake again. Rustle. Looking at the rapidly approaching Cercopithecus, the three-headed snake's fear deepened. Finally, just as Cercopithecus was about to approach, its huge snake body slid out like a sharp arrow and slithered in the opposite direction. The three-headed snake had chosen to escape. It was finally afraid. Phew! In the distance, Gray, who was hiding in the dense forest, let out a long sigh and sat on the ground. He had finally scared the three-headed snake away. Although Cercopithecus was not afraid of fighting now, it knew its own limits. If they continued to fight, the three-headed snake would probably be the one to win in the end, and not him and Cercopithecus. The reason was the power of blood. He had stimulated his plant ability to the maximum twice in a row, used his reverse nurturing ability, and continuously used his plant ability. After reaching the level of a blood berserker, his originally large amount of power of blood had almost been drained. If they continued to fight, he would not be able to support Cercopithecus at all. He had no choice but to let Cercopithecus fight on its own. Faced with the three-headed snake, which could still use its blood fiend ability, Cercopithecus's ending was imaginable. Originally, he had planned to escape before Cercopithecus was defeated. Fortunately, the three-headed snake could not hold back and was scared away first. It's too dangerous for a barbaric-level blood fiend to appear at this depth. I have to retreat as soon as possible. With a trace of fear on his face, Gray controlled Cercopithecus to follow and protect himself, who was almost out of power of blood. He quickly moved toward the periphery of the night forest. Chapter 233. Outside the night forest, a large empty space had been cleared out. On the empty space, tents were erected, and there were blood warriors leading soldiers to patrol the area. This was the camp of the Sidney family and the nobles under them, and it was also the main camp for clearing out the night forest. Gray, who had retreated from the depths of the night forest, came here. Who is it? Looking at Gray approaching the camp, a small group of people surrounded him. The leader was a middle-aged man in battle armor. If there were no surprises, he should be a blood warrior. I'm Gray Fergus, a member of the Fergus family. Gray said calmly. Nice to meet you, young Master Gray. Hearing Gray's name, the middle-aged man's face immediately showed some respect. Although he had never seen Gray, he had heard of Gray. In fact, in today's noble circle, there were very few people who had not heard of Gray's name. A 19-year-old ferocious blood warrior was too eye-catching, and it was hard not to hear of him. May I ask if Viscount Fergus is in the camp? Nodding to the man, Gray asked. Yes, young Master Gray. Shall I have someone lead you there? The middle-aged man said respectfully. Thank you very much. After thanking the man, Gray was led by a soldier to the tent area where the Fergus family was. Young Master Gray. Young Master Gray. In addition to the people of the Fergus family, there were also nobles from the Fergus family's territory in the Fergus family's tent area. Naturally, they all knew Gray, and when they saw Gray arrive, they all greeted him warmly. Now, Gray's position in the Viscount Fergus territory was only below that of Viscount Fergus. In addition, Gray's identity as the future heir of the Viscount's title, so these people were naturally eager to please him. Gray, you're here. Hearing the commotion, Viscount Fergus and Bernal came out of the tent. When they saw Gray, Bernal smiled and greeted him. Yes. Gray nodded and looked at the two, focusing on Viscount Fergus. Seeing that the other party's expression was normal, he understood that the other party's injuries from the encounter with the copper-armored rhinoceros should have already recovered. The three of them entered the tent. Before Gray could speak, Bernal spoke first. There's news from the castle that all the blood fiends under their control have died. Father and I were worried that something might have happened to you, but we're relieved to see that you're fine. How are the corpses of the blood fiends? Gray raised his eyebrows. When he heard Bernal mention it, he remembered something. The 4 corpses of the blood fiends in the castle had lost the ability to control corpses and would probably rot quickly. He had neglected this problem previously. With his current strength, it was naturally not difficult to obtain the corpses of ordinary berserk blood fiends. However, it would be a pity if the corpses of the Jade Lizard and Windrider Leopard rotted. Don't worry, they've been sent to the ice cellar to be preserved immediately. Bernal said, Gray, what happened to the 4 blood fiends? Why did they suddenly lose control? Viscount Fergus asked with a frown. Gray did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the entrance of the tent. After looking around and confirming that there was no one else nearby, he returned to his original seat and said, Because it has exceeded the upper limit of control. It really has exceeded the upper limit of control. Did you regain control of the blood fiends? Viscount Fergus and Bernal both knew that the magic weapon had an upper limit of control. They had also vaguely guessed in this regard. Yes, I regained control of another blood fiend. It's a berserk blood fiend. It's too difficult to control, so I can only control one. Gray nodded and said in a low voice. Since they asked, he did not intend to hide it. Viscount Fergus and Bernal were both people who could keep secrets. There was no need to hide this matter at all. What? You can still control a berserk blood fiend? Bernal exclaimed. Fortunately, he realized that he was not in the Fergus family. He hurriedly covered his mouth and lowered his voice. Viscount Fergus was also astonished. His face was full of shock and astonishment. He had originally thought that controlling 4 berserk blood fiends was the limit of the blood fiend's ability. He did not expect that he could still control a berserk blood fiend. Although he could only control 1 blood fiend, it was undoubtedly more powerful than before. Having been on the battlefield before, he understood the power of the berserk level all too well. Suddenly, the expression in his eyes changed. He thought of the berserk blood fiend that had accidentally saved their lives a few days ago. Gray, could it be that you were the one who controlled the berserk blood fiend Cercopithecus that day? Viscount Fergus felt that it was a little unreasonable to be saved by a berserk blood fiend out of nowhere. Now that he heard Gray say that the magic weapon could actually control a berserk blood fiend, he could not help but connect the dots. Yes, Gray nodded and said, The other families did not know that I was a berserk blood warrior. It was inconvenient for them to make a move, so they let this Cercopithecus do it. That Cercopithecus was actually controlled by you? Bernal's face was full of surprise and joy. He was surprised that the berserk blood fiend that had frightened him until he trembled was actually controlled by Gray. He was happy that a berserk blood fiend was actually controlled by the Fergus family. A berserk blood fiend, even if it could not use its blood fiend abilities, was definitely stronger than any berserk blood fiend. With such a blood fiend in charge, the Fergus family's strength would undoubtedly increase by another level. To put it bluntly, in the current Sydney Hill, other than the Sydney family, the Fergus family was not afraid of any other family, not even the 2 Count families. This gave him a deep sense of confidence. Father, what's the situation in the clearing of the Night Forest? Who is the Sydney family's overseer here? Gray looked at Viscount Fergus and asked. The Sydney family's overseer here is young Master Zeloyan. There is also a berserk blood warrior with him. Viscount Fergus said, As for the clearing of the Night Forest, it's very troublesome. The Night Forest is too dangerous now. Since a berserk blood warrior leading the team may encounter danger, the clearing has been temporarily suspended. Then what is the Sydney family's plan? Gray deeply understood that a berserk blood warrior leading the team could encounter danger. The Night Forest could be said to be run amok with blood fiends. Not only were there berserk and berserk blood fiends, there were even berserk blood fiends. However, they could not leave them alone. The blood fiends would not take the initiative to return to the depths of the Night Forest. If they were left alone, the surrounding areas of the Night Forest would inevitably be attacked by blood fiends. It would not be long before the surrounding areas became uninhabited. In fact, many areas that were originally cultivated had become forests for this reason. With a large number of blood fiends gathered, the surrounding areas were forced to become uninhabited. Over time, it naturally became a forest. Now, the safest way was naturally to have a berserk blood warrior leading the team to clear the blood fiends. However, Gray estimated that in the entire Sidney family, including Marquis Sidney, there were no more than 3 people of this level. The night forest was too vast. If only 2 or 3 berserk blood warriors were to lead the team, it would be too time-consuming. Moreover, these berserk blood warriors had their own important places to oversee. It was impossible for them to spend a long time here. So, this method was simply not feasible. The Sidney family is already preparing to mobilize the Copperback Dragon. Viscount Fergus said. Copperback Dragon. Hearing this name, Gray's expression immediately became respectful. The Copperback Dragon was a desolate-level blood fiend. It was a special desolate-level blood fiend with dragon blood fiends. Its ability was to transform its body into metal and manipulate metal. As a special blood fiend, it had a terrifying battle strength that could crush blood fiends of the same level. It could be said to be one of the strongest blood fiends below the king level. This was also the Sidney family's ultimate trump card, its most intimidating trump card. Many books had records of it. It was said that the reason the Sidney family was able to surpass many noble ranks and directly become the Marquis family had an extremely important relationship with this Copperback Dragon. He did not expect the Sidney family to be preparing to mobilize at this time. Subsequently, Gray settled down in the camp. As a noble with the strength of a ferocious blood warrior. In fact, he was also within the scope of the Sidney family's enlistment. However, he had not received the enlistment because he had not returned from trip. Since he had come, he naturally could not leave at will. This was the duty of a noble. It seemed rather troublesome to mobilize the Copperback Dragon. A few days passed, but the Copperback Dragon still had not arrived. During these few days, Gray casually strolled around the camp to pass the time. In the process, he met Zero and the Berserk Blood Warrior. The other party was a rather old man with thinning hair. It was said that he was the uncle of Marquis Sidney. Because of the commotion caused by cultivation, and because it was easy to judge one's strength through the commotion, Gray did not cultivate in the camp. As a result, he was unusually free. Today's camp could be said to be a gathering place for all the families of Marquis Sidney. From the Marquis family to the nobles' families, all of them were gathered here. Where there were people, there would naturally be disputes. This was especially true for the nobles, who were a group of interests. The relationship between some of the nobles was like fire and water. Duels would occur from time to time. Gray had seen many good shows and had a deeper understanding of the relationship between the nobles. Of course, the Fergus family also had families that were not on good terms with the Fergus family. For example, the Richens family, which had been defeated by the Fergus family in Sidney Castle, and the Smalley family, which had been destroyed by the Fergus family because of their enfeoffment of nobles. However, Gray's strength was there for all to see. Whether it was the Richens family or the Smalley family, no one dared to provoke him. However, it was said that before his arrival, the Richens family had the tendency to provoke the Fergus family. However, when Gray arrived, they immediately withered. Thump, thump, thump. A few days later, a huge commotion came toward the camp. The ground shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. Chapter 234. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone, including Gray, rushed out of the camp and looked in the direction of the noise. Thump, thump, thump. With a rumbling sound, a huge monster strode over. It was a huge blood fiend that looked like a lizard. Its eyes were as huge as lanterns. Its body length reached an exaggerated 10 meters. Its body was as heavy as a mountain. Its 4 huge claws were sharp, like the digging claws of an excavator. Its whole body was covered in bronze scales. There were many sharp spikes on its back like sharp spears. This is a Copperback Dragon. What a strong sense of oppression. Is this a desolate-level blood fiend? Why do I feel a little cold on my back? Why are you shivering? Noisy exclamations sounded among the crowd, and many of them were shivering uncontrollably. But the others who saw this scene did not have the slightest intention of mocking them, because their own situation was not much better. Looking at the terrifying blood fiend that could easily crush them, they instinctively felt fear. Even though they knew that the beast was the Sidney family's war beast and would not harm them, They could not help but feel fear. This was a human's instinct for danger, and it was not controlled by one's will. "It's simply a weapon of war." Taking a deep breath, Gray exclaimed in amazement. This was a weapon of war, armed to the teeth. This was Gray's first impression of the copperback dragon in front of him. Its huge body was like a mountain. Its forelegs were like huge metal pillars, its sharp claws, and its thick tail. He did not doubt that every part of its body could be turned into a weapon in battle. What a strong sense of oppression! Bernal's voice trembled, and he was extremely shocked. Viscount Fergus stared at it in silence. This was not the first time he saw the copperback dragon, but every time he saw it, he could not help but be deeply shocked. Shocked by its huge body, shocked by its metallic body, and shocked by its terrifying aura. Previously, he was sure that the Sidney family would not be interested in Gray's magical weapon that could control the corpses of berserk-level blood fiends because of the existence of this blood fiend. With such a background, why would the Sidney family be interested in a magical weapon that could only control 4 berserk-level blood fiends? To put it bluntly, 4 berserk-level blood fiends could not even block one claw of this huge creature. Even a berserk-level blood fiends that could be controlled would be easily crushed in a battle. Dong, dong, dong. The copperback dragon approached the campsite, and as it approached, a strong sense of oppression. Even Gray's heart could not help but tremble. He was shocked by its strength. In front of the camp, many people were trembling slightly, and many of them involuntarily retreated, afraid that the copperback dragon would step on them. With the copperback, the damage caused by the copperback dragons, even with the foots, fortunately, such a thing did not happen. Just as the copperback dragon approached the camp, a male voice rang out. "Stop!" Following this voice, the copperback dragon stopped, and its mountain-like body stood still in place. The voice came from the copperback dragon's back. Everyone looked at the copperback dragon's back and saw a man in bronze armor standing proudly. His golden hair was tied behind his head, and he stood with his hands behind his back, exuding a strong and majestic aura. After ordering the copperback dragon to stop, he jumped down from the copperback dragon and arrived in front of everyone. "Father, Lord Marquis." Seeing this person, Zero, the berserk blood warrior from the Sidney family, the 2 earls, Viscount Fergus, and Gray all went up and greeted him respectfully. The person in front of them was the ruler of the Sidney territory, Marquis Sidney. Marquis Sidney nodded and swept his gaze across the crowd. When his gaze fell on Gray, it paused for a moment, but quickly moved away. Presumably, because of the potential Gray had shown, he had noticed Gray. Of course, that was all. Although he was talented, he was still a ferocious blood warrior and naturally did not attract much attention from the Marquis. "Father, did you come alone?" Zero asked. "The team is in the back. The copperback dragon's aura is too strong for the horses to bear." Marquis Sidney shook his head. Whether it was blood fiends or wild beasts, they would emit their aura as a means of intimidating other blood fiends and wild beasts. As a desolate-level blood fiend, the copperback dragon's aura was terrifying to other blood fiends and wild beasts. Ordinary horses would find it difficult to stand in front of a copperback dragon. "What's the situation in the night forest now?" "It's still not working. After that, we tried to clear it, but we unexpectedly encountered a savage beast." "Savage beast?" Marquis Sidney raised his eyebrows. He already had an idea and did not continue the topic. "Is the place ready to settle the copperback dragon?" "It's ready. Lead the way." Under Zero's lead, Marquis Sidney drove the copperback dragon away. Looking at the back of the copperback dragon, Gray's eyes had a trace of eagerness. A special desolate-level blood fiend could transform itself into metal and manipulate metal. He did not want to obtain the copperback dragon's blood to be fake. Unfortunately, although he was close at hand, he could not do anything to the copperback dragon. Not to mention that the Sidney family would never allow him to bleed the copperback dragon. Even if they agreed, with his current strength, he could not do it. There was a huge gap between 2 levels, so his attack could cause almost no damage to the copperback dragon. A few hours later, the Sidney family gathered all the nobles in the camp to attend a meeting. "You want me to go too?" Gray was slightly surprised. Yes, Zero specifically asked you to come along. Viscount Fergus nodded. Originally, the gathering was for the nobles in the camp. The nobles' children were not included, but Zero obviously gave special treatment to Gray, who already had the strength of a ferocious blood warrior. Oh, Gray nodded and did not refuse. With his current strength, he was indeed worthy of this special treatment. Together with Viscount Fergus, Gray came to a huge tent in the camp. In the tent, there were wooden chairs and a slightly shabby tea table. After all, this was a camping camp, so the conditions could not be very good. Many people had already taken their seats. Gray and Viscount Fergus sat on the left and right sides of the tea table. Seeing that Gray had also come, the nobles who had a good relationship with the Fergus family smiled and nodded to Gray. On the other hand, the nobles who did not have a good relationship with Gray, such as Count Smalley and Viscount Richens, looked a little gloomy. Gray Fergus had been specially summoned, but their children had not. This showed that the Sidney family valued him differently. I believe everyone knows the purpose of gathering you here. After everyone was seated, Marquis Sidney, who was sitting on the main seat, glanced at everyone present and said, "Lord Marquis, are we preparing to take action against the blood fiends in the Night Forest?" "Yes, we are preparing to take action tomorrow. In order to prevent the blood fiends and wild beasts from escaping the Night Forest, The meeting lasted for more than an hour. The general content was that the Sidney family was preparing to drive the blood fiends out of the Night Forest tomorrow. Although the goal was to drive them out of the Night Forest, there would inevitably be blood fiends that would flee out of the Night Forest in a panic during the drive. Therefore, the Sidney family divided all the nobles into several small teams responsible for strangling and killing the blood fiends and wild beasts that fled out of the Night Forest. Because Viscount Fergus and Gray were both ferocious blood warriors and were relatively strong, the Fergus family was divided into a small team. The next day, a bestial roar exploded outside the Night Forest like a clap of thunder on a rainy day. The 10-meter-long copperback dragon walked towards the Night Forest with heavy footsteps that sounded like the sound of a bell and drum. Thick trees collapsed under its feet. Its huge body caused a huge commotion as it moved forward. Everything it encountered along the way, be it trees or rocks, was destroyed as easily as withered twigs and rotten wood. It even directly used its metal manipulation ability as a blood fiend to manipulate the metal in the ground into countless weapons. It flattened a forest with a diameter of several hundred meters. Its terrifying destructive power was undeniable. Following the huge commotion, a large number of blood fiends and wild beasts panicked and fled for their lives. Large swathes of trees swayed and collapsed. It was a scene of panic. A beast tide was formed once again. Only this time, it was heading towards the depths of the Night Forest. The Fergus family was on a high ground in their assigned area. They looked at the commotion caused by the copperback dragon in the distance, their eyes filled with shock, especially when they saw the destruction of everything within a radius of several hundred meters. That kind of shock was simply indescribable. What terrifying destructive power! Is this the destructive power of a desolate-level blood fiend? After a long time, Bonner recovered from his stupor and murmured, "That's right." Gray and Viscount Fergus were also shocked as they looked at the forest that had been flattened. The shock in their hearts was no less than his. Although Viscount Fergus had seen the copperback dragon before, he had never seen it use its blood fiend ability. Naturally, he did not know the destructive power of the copperback dragon. As for Gray, although he had seen desolate-level blood fiends in the Night Forest, they only cared about running away and did not attack. This was also his first time seeing a desolate-level blood fiend use its blood fiend ability. Not all desolate-level blood fiends have this kind of destructive power. Hearing Bernal's sigh, Gray shook his head. As a special blood fiend, the copperback dragon is one of the most powerful desolate-level blood fiends. Although the other desolate-level blood fiends are very powerful, they are still lacking compared to the copperback dragon. Let's go. Let's keep up. Don't let the blood fiends and wild beasts panic and flee to the periphery. Viscount Fergus restrained the shock on his face and said, "Yes." Gray and Bernal both nodded. Chapter 235. 2 days later. Thump, thump, thump. The 10-meter-long bronze-back dragon stepped forward, causing the ground to tremble violently with every step. From time to time, thunderous roars could be heard, emitting a terrifying aura. In front of it, trees collapsed and swayed. Blood fiends and wild beasts ran wildly, forming a terrifying beast tide that headed deep into the night forest. Occasionally, there would be blood fiends or wild beasts that panicked and tried to escape from the night forest. However, they would immediately be pierced by the rain of metal and turn into hedgehogs. Even a berserk blood fiend could not escape such a fate. Under the terrifying attack of the bronze-back dragon, no matter if it was a wild beast, a murderous blood fiend, or a berserk blood fiend, there was no difference. There were 2 people on the bronze-back dragon's broad back. One was a blond middle-aged man in a bronze battle suit, while the other was a blond youth in a white battle suit. They were Marquis Sidney and Zeloyan. "Father, this beast tide is too strange." There were no signs at all. Zeloyan frowned, holding the thick metal spikes on the bronze-back dragon's back. "It is indeed a little strange." Marquis Sidney nodded. Something must have happened in the night forest. Could it be related to the king beast? Zeloyan asked. To be able to cause such a huge beast tide, it must be the king beast. Marquis Sidney's eyes flashed with fear as he spoke with certainty. A king beast was a blood fiend at the king level. At that level, it could easily destroy a city. In history, there had been a king beast that broke into a city and massacred the entire city. It could be said that the king beast was a moving disaster. Wherever it went, there was bound to be a disaster. Aristocrats like them knew that there were many blood fiends of this level on the continent. The only fortunate thing was that such blood fiends stayed in the depths of the forest and generally did not leave. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Some time ago, Sir Zandibo of Mercenary City appeared in the territory. Could this be related to... Zeloyan spoke carefully, but he was interrupted by Marquis Sidney. "That person is not someone we can discuss." Marquis Sidney shook his head slightly. An existence of that level was not someone the Sidney family could afford to offend. Not to mention that they still couldn't be sure if the beast horde was caused by the other party. Even if they knew that the beast tide was caused by the other party, there was nothing they could do about it. They couldn't even complain. Existences of that level had already surpassed the rules and were not restricted by titles or fiefs. Even the royal family of the Purple Moon Kingdom had to treat the other party with the utmost courtesy, let alone the Marquis family. While the 2 of them were talking, a blood fiend covered in long black fur heard the copperback dragon's roar. It didn't flee in panic like the other blood fiends. Instead, it moved its 4 legs and walked towards the copperback dragon. It was a 9-meter-long, pig-shaped blood fiend with long tusks on both sides of its mouth. Its 4 legs were very thick and broken, with huge hooves on them, like 4 huge stone pillars. Every time its hooves landed, it would leave a deep dent in the ground. Large tracts of trees were collapsing. A desolate level blood fiend. The huge commotion finally attracted the attention of Marquis Sidney and his son. Both of their faces became solemn. They jumped off the copperback dragon without hesitation and retreated into the distance. Although they hadn't seen the appearance of the approaching blood fiend, they could already guess what level it was. Only a desolate level blood fiend would dare to approach a desolate level copperback dragon. Even Marquis Sidney could barely participate in a battle of that level, and it was very likely that he would be injured or even killed. Therefore, the 2 of them chose to stay away for the time being without hesitation. Following behind the copperback dragon, Gray and the others finally saw what a massacre was. From time to time, they could see blood fiends and wild beasts falling, their blood staining the ground red. The unparalleled destructive power was simply terrifying. The only thing that made Gray feel slightly regretful was that he didn't find any traces of a barbaric-level blood fiend, so he couldn't obtain its blood. During the battle with the 3-headed snake a few days ago, the 3-headed snake had bled, but Gray didn't collect any of its blood. During the battle, he naturally didn't have the energy to collect the blood. After the battle, he found that the blood had either evaporated under the terrifyingly high temperature or seeped into the soil. Gray had some ideas about blood fiends like the multi-headed snake. It was a very special blood fiend sequence. It could be considered an ordinary blood fiend, but it could also be considered a special blood fiend. This was because the number of snake heads would increase with each level, and the blood fiend abilities it could master would also increase. Its combat power among blood fiends of the same level increased with its level. According to the description in the book, a 5-headed snake had appeared in history, and its combat power was comparable to a special blood fiend of the same level. Gray couldn't help but have an idea. If he swallowed the blood of snakes of the 10 attributes of earth, fire, wind, thunder, ice, shadow, water, poison, wood, and metal, wouldn't he be able to fuse them into a 10-headed snake bloodline? A 5-headed snake was already as powerful as a special blood fiend of the same level. How powerful would a 10-headed snake bloodline be? Gray estimated that if the 10-headed snake bloodline was really a divine beast bloodline, then it wouldn't be a problem for it to fight against opponents of a higher level. If it couldn't even fight against opponents of a higher level, then this divine beast bloodline would be too trashy. Of course, this was Gray's ideal situation. In fact, it was very difficult to obtain a 10-headed snake bloodline. Take the 3-headed snake as an example. If he wanted to obtain a 10-headed snake bloodline, he would have to swallow at least 4 types of 3-headed snake blood. Obviously, this was extremely difficult to find. As for low-level blood fiends, such as the shadow snake and other single-attribute murderous-level blood fiends, they were easier to find. However, the number of times they needed to be swallowed would be higher, and it would also affect the strength of the blood fiend's ability. Even if he was willing to spend so many times, the final fusion would only result in a 10-headed snake bloodline that was only at the murderous level. Even if this bloodline was a divine beast bloodline, which was extremely powerful and could fight against opponents of 2 levels higher, it would only be at the barbarian level. After consuming the blood 10 times, his strength had already reached the barbarian level. It was basically useless to him. Once he gathered all the blood fiends, he might have the destructive power to fight against opponents of a higher level. However, it was very difficult to gather all the blood fiends. This was why Gray wasn't too enthusiastic about the Hydra bloodline, even though he was interested in it. On the other hand, Gray was very enthusiastic about the bronze-backed dragon bloodline. Originally, he had planned to consume the bronze-armored rhinoceros blood to increase his body's defense after increasing the power of his icy wind blades. Although it was only a berserk-level blood fiend and would be eliminated after reaching the barbarian level, its effect was extremely powerful and could greatly increase his overall strength. The bronze-backed dragon bloodline was simply the bronze-armored rhinoceros ideal bloodline. As a blood fiend that could strengthen its body's defense through metallization, its defense would definitely not be weaker than the bronze-armored rhinoceros at the same level. Moreover, because it was a dire beast, even if Gray's strength reached the barbarian level in the future, it would still be effective and would not be eliminated in the short term. With such an ideal defensive bloodline in front of him, Gray was naturally very enthusiastic about it. There were barbarian-level blood fiends in the last beast tide. I wonder if we'll encounter them? Gray did not dare to let out the blood of the bronze-backed dragon, nor was he able to do it. The only thing that could do it was a barbarian-level blood fiend. Gray could not help but look forward to the encounter between the bronze-backed dragon and a barbarian-level blood fiend. If that was the case, there might be a chance that blood would be shed, and he might also be able to obtain the blood of the bronze-backed dragon. Screech! A sound even sharper than the roar of the bronze-backed dragon suddenly rang out, shaking the eardrums of Gray and the others who were following behind the dragon. What's wrong? What happened? That doesn't sound like the bronze-backed dragon. Hearing the roar, the small groups of aristocratic families following behind the bronze-backed dragon stopped in their tracks, their expressions changing abruptly. This was different from the sound of the bronze-backed dragon, and it gave them a bad feeling. What happened? Could it be? On the other hand, Gray's heart was on fire. He looked around and saw a hillside with higher terrain, so he hurriedly climbed toward it. Relying on his strong physique, he easily climbed up the hillside. When he reached the hillside, he looked around and quickly found the source of the sound, because it was too conspicuous. It was a barren, irregular open space with a diameter of about 100 meters. Two huge creatures were confronting each other. The smaller one was a barbarian-level blood fiend. The larger one was a barbarian-level blood fiend with a bronze body. Due to the distance, even with his eyesight, it was difficult for him to clearly see the appearance of the two blood fiends. However, judging from the color of its body, the barbarian-level blood fiend must be the bronze-backed dragon. A barbarian-level blood fiend? We've really encountered a barbarian-level blood fiend. Gray could not help but become slightly excited. Although the barbarian-level blood fiend was slightly smaller than the barbarian-level blood fiend, the difference was not huge. It was obvious that the one confronting the barbarian-level blood fiend was a barbarian-level blood fiend. If the barbarian-level blood fiend really encountered the barbarian-level blood fiend, then the possibility of him obtaining the blood of the barbarian-level blood fiend increased. Screech, just like before, a sharp cry rang out again. Boom! With a loud boom, the huge body of the barbarian-level blood fiend slid backward, as if it had suffered a heavy blow, plowing a long gully in the ground. It was as if an invisible shock wave had swept across the area. The ground and the nearby trees were all pulverized. The area of the open space, which was originally about 100 meters in diameter, suddenly expanded to 200 meters. There was no visible attack from the barbarian-level blood fiend, but the barbarian-level blood fiend was sent flying. The soil on the ground and the surrounding trees were also inexplicably pulverized. This was an invisible attack. Chapter 236. An attack that cannot be seen. Gray's pupils shrank as he thought of the sharp roar. A guess surfaced in his mind. Sound wave attack. Could it be a sound wave attack? Gray thought of two possibilities regarding an attack that could not be seen. One was psychokinesis, and the other was sound waves. However, the black blood fiend had roared when it attacked. Obviously, the attack had come from its mouth. Gray guessed that the black blood fiend had the ability to manipulate sound waves and turn them into weapons. Roar, the copperback dragon, which had been sent flying, got up angrily. It did not seem to have suffered any damage from the black blood fiend's attack. However, the bronze color on its surface had deepened. Obviously, it must have metallized its body the moment it was attacked, blocking the attack just now. Its lantern-sized eyes stared at the black blood fiend as it roared furiously. Then, a large amount of metal powder appeared on the ground and condensed into thousands of metal blades. Then, these thousands of metal blades shot toward the black blood fiend like a dense rain of arrows. Screech! The black blood fiend felt threatened and roared. An invisible sound wave spread out. Many of the metal blades that were piercing toward it disintegrated and turned into powder. However, there were still many blades that managed to break through the sound wave and hit the black blood fiend's body. Poof, poof, poof. The black blood fiend was sent flying. Blood flowed out from its body and dyed its body red. Poof! The black blood fiend was about to get up, but at this moment, along with the tremors on the ground, a metal claw reached out and left several deep scratches on its body. Screech! The black blood fiend roared in pain. An invisible sound wave hit the copperback dragon again. Boom! The copperback dragon was sent flying, but quickly got up again. The dense metal blades attacked the black blood fiend again. The copperback dragon also charged toward the black blood fiend. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The battle between the copperback dragon and the black blood fiend was simple and violent. The chaotic, destructive power spread out in all directions. Initially, the area was only 100 meters in diameter. As the battle continued, the area continued to expand. Finally, it became 1,000 meters in diameter. The ground was full of potholes, as if the surface of the moon had been hit by a meteorite. The black blood fiend was covered in blood, but the copperback dragon was still intact. The strength of a special blood fiend was undeniable. The copperback dragon was not injured. On the hillside, Gray frowned as he watched the battle between the copperback dragon and the black blood fiend. He had wanted to wait until the battle between the copperback dragon and the black blood fiend, but he did not expect the black blood fiend to fail to injure the copperback dragon. As for the blood of the Black Blood Fiend, he was not interested. Although it was a very special ability, it was clearly not very powerful for a desolate grade. It could not even hurt the Copperback Dragon. Although the Copperback Dragon's it was not hard to tell. What he wanted was the blood of a blood fiend that was extremely powerful in certain aspects compared to other blood fiends of the same level. He did not want the blood of any high-grade blood fiend. Therefore, even if he could obtain the Black Blood Fiend's blood, he would keep it as a sample at most. He would not consume it unless he discovered that the Blood Fiend's blood was mixed with other blood fiends and extended into an extremely powerful ability. Rip! The Black Blood Fiend was knocked over. The Copperback Dragon pressed its two front limbs against the Black Blood Fiend's body. It lowered its head, revealing its sharp teeth, and bit the Black Blood Fiend's neck. The Black Blood Fiend struggled. Finally, the Copperback Dragon bit the Black Blood Fiend's shoulder and tore off a large piece of flesh. The wound was dripping with blood. Blood flowed out from the wound. Squeak! The eyes of the Black Blood Fiend, which had a piece of its flesh bitten off, turned red from the pain, and it let out a sharp cry. A formless sound wave, more powerful than before, rushed toward the Copperback Dragon. The Black Blood Fiend, forced into a desperate situation, fought with all its might. Boom! The Copperback Dragon was sent flying by the sound wave. It fell and slid for dozens of meters before finally coming to a stop. It did not get up immediately. Instead, it took a while to get up from the ground. Many cracks had appeared on its originally bronze metallic body. Streaks of bronze blood flowed out and dripped to the ground. It's injured. In the distance, on a hillside, Gray's eyes suddenly lit up. Due to the distance, he couldn't see if there were any wounds on the Copperback Dragon's body, nor could he see the bronze blood flowing down the Copperback Dragon. But, judging from the Copperback Dragon's movements, it was very likely that it was injured. Roar! The injured Copperback Dragon was enraged. As it rushed toward the Black Blood Fiend, a large amount of metal powder flew up and turned into thousands of metal blades that shot toward the Black Blood Fiend. Squeak! The Black Blood Fiend roared, and formless sound waves swept out toward the Copperback Dragon. Boom! The numerous metal blades collided with the formless sound waves in midair. A terrifying roar sounded. Then, the metal blades shattered, and the formless sound waves continued to spread forward and hit the charging Copperback Dragon. The Copperback Dragon was sent flying backward on the spot. After injuring the Copperback Dragon, it used the Blood Fiend's ability to block the Copperback Dragon's metal blades and sent the Copperback Dragon flying. Obviously, this was not the Black Blood Fiend's normal strength. This was the result of a desperate battle. Roar! The Copperback Dragon roared even more angrily after being sent flying. First, it was injured. Then its attack was blocked. Its bronze eyes were filled with terrifying hostility. A large amount of metal powder floated up again. This time, the amount was unusually large. The metal blades formed were larger and denser. Then, with a terrifying whistling sound, they pierced toward the Black Blood Fiend. Gee! The Black Blood Fiend roared, and formless shockwaves met the metal blades. Many of the metal blades shattered, but more of them broke through the blockade and hit the Black Blood Fiend's body. Puff, 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 puff. More destructive power than before exploded from the metal blades. Under the attack of the metal blades, the Black Blood Fiend's body, which was already full of wounds, quickly became a bloody mess. Even its white bones and internal organs were exposed. Blood flowed out like a river. It struggled to stand up, but it could not. It was obviously seriously injured. Even the Copperback Dragon could not easily injure the Black Blood Fiend with one attack. Obviously, the Copperback Dragon, which had been injured by the Black Blood Fiend's desperate attacks, was completely enraged. It did not hesitate to use its Blood Fiend ability. So strong. The Copperback Dragon is so much stronger than the Black Blood Fiend. Seeing this scene, many people who were watching from afar exclaimed in shock. The Black Blood Fiend was strong enough. In an instant, it had wiped out an area with a diameter of more than 100 meters. However, the Copperback Dragon was even stronger. It had been suppressing the Black Blood Fiend. After being provoked by the Black Blood Fiend, It displayed its powerful combat strength and severely injured the Black Blood Fiend with one attack. It was indeed a special Blood Fiend. It could easily crush a desolate-level Blood Fiend of the same level. Thump, thump, thump. The Copperback Dragon ran toward the Black Blood Fiend with heavy steps. The Black Blood Fiend struggled to stand up, but it failed again and again. Finally, the Copperback Dragon arrived in front of the Black Blood Fiend. It bared its chilling teeth and bit down on the Black Blood Fiend's throat. Crack! A bloody hole was bitten into the Black Blood Fiend's throat. Blood flowed out like a fountain. The Black Blood Fiend's body trembled slightly before it finally stopped struggling. What a terrifying battle! Seeing that the battle had ended, all the teams, including Gray's team, rushed toward the open space. Viscount Fergus and the rest could not help but sigh when they arrived at the edge of the open space that was more than 1,000 meters in diameter. Gray's eyes were also filled with astonishment. Previously, they were too far away, so the 1,000-meter open space did not seem very big. Now that they were at the edge of the open space, they could finally feel the vastness of the open space. A layer of the ground had been forcefully shaved off. It was full of crater-like potholes and ravine-like battle scars. Just from these scars, it was not hard to imagine the strength of the two blood fiends. He had no time to be shocked. He hurried to the place where the Copperback Dragon had been injured. His top priority now was to see if he could obtain the blood of the Copperback Dragon. It was a deep crater created by the Copperback Dragon that had been sent flying. If there was blood flowing out, it was most likely to be in that place. Arriving at the deep pothole, he looked around. There really is blood. Soon his eyes lit up. There were sporadic streaks of bronze-colored blood in the deep pothole. Some had fallen on the soil and had seeped into it. Some had fallen on the rocks, revealing a bronze-colored luster. Gray hurriedly took out his rune bag and collected the blood on the rocks. In the end, he collected less than half of the blood. Moreover, it was stained with dust. He did not know if it would be useful. After collecting the blood, he looked into the distance. In the distance, there was a small mountain of Black Blood Fiends' corpses. All the teams were gathered there, looking at the huge Blood Fiends' corpses in amazement. The blood of the Black Blood Fiends had been collected by Marquis Sidney and his son, who had arrived first. There was a lot of blood flowing around, but it was not collected. Some people were collecting the blood that had dripped onto the ground. Needless to say, the blood of a desolate-level blood fiend was precious. It would definitely be of great help to the family's descendants. As nobles, they loved cleanliness, but they would not care about such good things. Gray walked over and took the opportunity to collect some of the Black Blood Fiend's blood. Although he did not intend to consume it, it was better to keep it as a backup. Chapter 237. The blood and flesh of the Black Blood Fiend were dissected and transported away by the Sidney family. They continued to drive the Blood Fiends from the Night Forest until they were within 100 miles of the forest before finally stopping. During the process, Gray and the rest encountered a total of 7 murderous-level Blood Fiends. With the combined efforts of Gray and Viscount Fergus, the Blood Fiends were easily killed. The blood and other spoils obtained from the Blood Fiends were distributed among the small teams. After the blood of the Copperback Dragon was collected, the aristocratic families were also given some. In the end, the aristocratic families returned with a large sum of money. "Old master, you are back. Brother." Madame de Milan, Sarah, Elise, Caroline, and Bernice welcomed them into the living room. They chatted about what they had seen and heard during this period of time. Naturally, the battle between the Copperback Dragon and the Black Blood Fiend was mentioned. What? Just the aftermath of the battle razed everything within a kilometer radius to the ground? Are desolate-level Blood Fiends that strong? Their attacks can't be seen. They can actually turn into metal. After hearing the description of the battle, Madame de Milan covered her mouth in shock. Caroline was shocked, and Sarah's eyes were wide open. Everyone had different expressions on their faces, but without exception, they were all filled with shock and astonishment. To them, the murderous blood warriors were already extremely powerful. When they suddenly heard that a desolate-level blood fiend had the terrifying power to destroy the heavens and earth, they felt that it was extremely absurd and unreal. If it could raise everything within a kilometer radius to the ground, wouldn't it be easy to destroy Fergus Castle? If it weren't for the fact that Gray and the other two had said the same thing, they would have thought that it was a fabrication. Brother, are desolate level blood fiends that powerful? Sarah shook Gray's hand and blinked her eyes as she asked Gray in astonishment. She had seen and ridden blood fiends before, but it was hard for her to associate them with such destructive power. Something like that. Gray nodded and explained. However, the copperback dragon, which is the blood beast of the Sydney family, is extremely powerful even among the desolate level blood beasts. I didn't expect there to be such a powerful blood fiend in the night forest. How can we resist it? Bernice had a worried look on her face. For a very long time, the blood fiends have been a threat to the survival of mankind. Suddenly hearing that there was such a powerful blood fiend, she couldn't help but feel deeply worried. Didn't I block it? Don't worry, the Purple Moon Kingdom has king-class warriors. Bernal patted her hand and comforted her. Hearing that he was a king-class warrior, the latter heaved a sigh of relief. To a kingdom, a king-level warrior was like a pillar that supported the heavens. It was because of their existence that the kingdom would not fall into a state of panic. King-level warrior? Hearing Bernal mention a king-class warrior, Gray couldn't help but think of the ghost merchant who could pull a street or even a city into an illusion in an instant. If the other party had really lived since the era of the Empire, it was inevitable that the other party's strength exceeded that of a king-class warrior. He just didn't know if the other party would lend a helping hand when mankind was in danger. The more powerful a person was, the less bound they would be by rules. When mankind was in danger, it was entirely possible that the other party would choose to stand by indifferently, especially when the other party had once witnessed the destruction of an empire. After chatting for a while, Gray left for the cellar. He checked the frozen blood fiends' corpses. They had not been frozen for long, and the corpses had not decomposed. After regaining control of the jade lizards, ox-type blood fiends, and leopard-type blood fiends, as well as the copperback rhinoceros corpse from the rune space bag, Gray heaved a sigh of relief. He couldn't help but recall his experience when he left home. It wasn't just any ordinary ups and downs. He had encountered danger for the second time. The first time was when he encountered the beast tide, and the second time was when he encountered the three-headed snake, a barbaric-level blood fiend. Other than that, he had also seen many spectacular scenes. The beast tide that covered the sky and covered the earth without end. The battle between the two desolate-level blood fiends that razed everything within a kilometer radius to the ground. His gains were also huge. He had obtained a rune space bag with an area of 1,000 cubic meters. His debt had been reduced from 3 million gold coins to 1,050,000 gold coins. He had obtained the blood of the Berserk-level blood fiend Knife Weasel, the Berserk-level blood fiend Copperback Rhinoceros, the Barbaric-level blood fiend Cercopithecus, the Desolate-level blood fiend Icesoul Beast, and the Desolate-level blood fiend Copperback Dragon. He had also obtained the corpse of a Barbaric-level blood fiend Cercopithecus, which had made his ability to control corpses even more powerful. Danger and opportunity really coexist. If I had stayed at home, I probably wouldn't have encountered these dangers, but at the same time, I wouldn't have been able to obtain these benefits. All kinds of experiences flashed through Gray's mind, and in the end, they turned into a sigh. After all, he was only born in an ordinary aristocratic family. Before he became a berserker, the Fergus family could still give him some help. But after he became a berserker, the Fergus family could hardly give him any help. If he wanted to grow and improve his strength, he had to seek resources himself. Although the transformation ability was very powerful and could allow his strength to grow rapidly, if he did not even have the most basic resources, it would be very difficult for him to improve. After all, the transformation required the blood of powerful blood fiends as a catalyst. My strength now is not inferior to that of an ordinary count's family, and even surpasses it. But there is still a long way to go before I reach the level of the Marquis family. This experience had given Gray a general understanding of his strength. The realm of a berserker, in addition to his numerous bloodline talents, and the fact that he had the ability to control the barbaric-level blood fiend Sarcopithecus made Gray's strength extremely powerful in the Berserker level. Except for a few Counts families who had the strength of a Berserker or had similar trump cards, the other Counts families were no match for Gray. Other things aside, Count Smalley and Count Ford's families in the Sydney Marquis Dom were definitely not a match for him at the moment. But once it was the Marquis family, he would immediately be no match for them. They didn't need too many. Just one Berserker was enough to defeat him. As for the Barbarian Blood Warriors, to a Marquis family, they were just a common force among the high-end forces. For example, the Sydney family had the Bronzeback Dragon, a special blood fiend at the wild level. The difference in strength was not small, but Gray estimated that the Sydney family was probably one of the strongest families in the Marquis family. Although he didn't know much about the other Marquis family, he thought that there were very few who could take out a trump card like the strongest blood fiend below the king level, half a step away from the barbarian level. This should be the accurate definition of my current strength. Gray wasn't dissatisfied with his current strength of half a step away from the barbarian level. After all, he was only a little over 19 years old, not even 20 years old yet. With his combat strength, his growth speed was already extremely terrifying. Even Zeloyan, a descendant of the Marquis family, who had many times more resources than him, didn't grow as fast as him. So far, he had only seen Sophia's growth rate that was not inferior to his own, but the family behind her might even be more powerful than the Marquis family. They had once produced a king-level warrior. It wasn't hard to understand why a duke's family with a terrifying background could grow at such a speed. 2 months later, in the bathroom of the Fergus family's castle, Gray lay on his back in the bathroom and drank the blood of a blood fiend in a small bronze bottle. The blood in the small bronze bottle was the blood of the Ice Soul Beast. It was the blood of a special blood fiend with the ice attribute. In order to obtain this blood, Gray had paid a total of 50,000 gold coins. Although Gray wasn't dissatisfied with his current speed of growth, but if there was a chance to increase his strength in a short period of time, Gray naturally wouldn't miss it. According to his previous estimation, taking the blood of a special blood fiend with the ice attribute and a special blood fiend with the wind attribute should be able to increase the power of his ice wind blade by leaps and bounds, giving him the ability to fight above his level. However, the blood of a special blood fiend with the wind attribute and the blood of a knife weasel were only of the mad level. The limit was only the mad level. After reaching the barbarian level, they would be eliminated. On the other hand, the blood of a special blood fiend with the ice attribute could last longer and not be eliminated because it was the blood of a desolate level blood fiend. So in the end, he chose to take the blood of the Ice Soul Beast and see if there was a way to obtain the blood of a special blood fiend with the wind attribute that was above the barbarian level. If there was no way to obtain it, it wouldn't be too late to take the blood of the knife weasel. Chapter 238. Gulp. After swallowing the blood, Gray squinted his eyes and lay in the bathtub, waiting. He had experienced the heat rising from his stomach many times. Boom! A terrifying reaction appeared in Gray's stomach and quickly spread throughout his body. However, Gray's eyes suddenly opened and he looked at the hot water in the bathtub in shock. Crack! He saw that the hot water that was originally steaming had already disappeared, and there were even specks of white ice crystals. At this moment, Gray's body was exuding an ice-cold aura. The water in the bathtub was rapidly freezing into ice. What's going on? Gray was shocked. After swallowing the blood of the Ice Soul Beast, a terrifying reaction indeed appeared in Gray's stomach. However, it was not a heat that could burn a person, but a coldness that could freeze a person. This was Gray's first time encountering such a situation. In the past, whenever he swallowed the blood of any blood fiend, his body would emit a terrifying heat, as if he was being roasted over a fire. However, this time, he felt an unusual coldness invading his body. Although I have swallowed a blood fiend with the ability to freeze, I have also swallowed Hanhu's blood before. I did not feel this coldness. What is going on? Gray's heart was full of doubts. He tried hard to recall the books he had read about cultivation and blood fiends. Finally, a word popped out his mind. Attribute modification. This is an attribute modification that only occurs when a desolate level bloodline is implanted. In a book about blood techniques, it was mentioned that every level up from the desolate level to the king level would increase one's strength by leaps and bounds. Perhaps it was to adapt to such a powerful ability and avoid hurting oneself when using it. When a desolate level or king level bloodline was implanted, one's body would be modified accordingly and gain resistance to such abilities. Those implanted with a fire-type bloodline would be modified to have a higher resistance to fire. This way, when they used their fire-type abilities, they would not be hurt by the overly powerful flames they used. Similarly, those implanted with a lightning bloodline would be modified to have a higher resistance to lightning. The person who was implanted with a poison bloodline would be modified to have a strong resistance to poison. The person who was implanted with the frost bloodline would be modified to have a strong resistance to the cold. In his current situation, he was clearly being modified to have a strong resistance to ice. This is an attribute modification that only happens when a desolate level bloodline is implanted. In other words, I did ingest the blood of a blood fiend. No, I should say that I fused with the bloodline of a blood fiend. For a long time, Gray had a suspicion that the process of him swallowing blood was the process of implanting the corresponding bloodline, but he had never been able to confirm it. Now that he had swallowed a desolate level ice-type bloodline, his body's elemental transformation had finally proven that he could indeed swallow the blood of the corresponding blood fiend and implant the corresponding bloodline. Moreover, this method of transplanting the bloodline by swallowing the blood of blood fiends had broken the conventional iron law of not transplanting bloodlines beyond one's level. His current strength was only at the mad level, but he had already transplanted a desolate level bloodline, which was the best proof. Although the cold wasn't scorching, it still had the effect of making Gray feel sleepy. Gray's mind was drowsy. Half an hour later, when Gray felt that his body was no longer cold and his mind had become clear, he found that he was frozen in the bathtub. The water in the bathtub was completely frozen by the cold emitted from his body while he was drowsy, turning into a block of ice. Surprisingly, even though his entire body was frozen in ice, he didn't feel cold at all. There was only a refreshing feeling. Crack! With Gray's current strength, it was naturally impossible for him to not be able to break free from the ice. With a slight force, countless fine cracks appeared on the ice, and he easily broke free from it. His body was still extremely tired. Although the reaction was different from when he swallowed the blood fiend blood, the result was the same. His body became extremely tired, as if he had stayed up for several days and nights. How should I deal with this? Gray rubbed his temples and forced himself to be alert. He looked at the block of ice in the bathtub. How could he explain that the bathwater had frozen when he was taking a bath? After thinking for a while, he finally dug out all the ice blocks and put them into his rune space bag. He left the castle and found a deserted place to throw them away. After resting for a day, Gray went to the forest near the castle the next day. He did some simple exercises and didn't feel any changes in his body. Obviously, the Ice Soul Beast body was not stronger than the Jasper lizards in the same realm. This didn't matter. From the beginning, he didn't expect the Ice Soul Beast body to be stronger than the Jasper lizards in the same realm. After all, the Jasper lizard was a special blood fiend with a trace of dragon's bloodline. Its body was quite strong compared to other blood fiends in the same realm. It's time to test the blood fiend's ability. Next, it was time to test the Ice Soul Beast's ability. I wonder if the Ice Soul Beast blood will increase the power of the Frost Wind Blade, as I expected. Gray took a deep breath. According to his estimation, after swallowing the Ice Soul Beast's blood, the Ice Soul Beast's ice ability would merge with the Frost Wind Blade and increase its power. Of course, this was only Gray's estimation. He would only know after testing. After all, the direction of the transformation after swallowing the Ice Soul Beast's blood was not controlled by Gray. Swish! Gray used the Frost Wind Blade. Suddenly, a cyan wind blade that looked different from the previous one appeared. The cyan wind blade had a jade-like, icy green color. It looked like a piece of art that was completely polished out of jadeite. It was beautiful and full of strong ornamental value, making people want to touch it with their hands. Puff, 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 puff. The icy green frost wine blade slashed out and left a trail that extended for more than 20 meters. All the trees along the way were cut in half and fell to the ground. The trees that were cut in half, and even the trees that were a few meters away, were all turned into white ice sculptures. There was a row of fallen trees in the middle, and on both sides were trees that were completely turned into ice sculptures. The power of the ice has increased. There was no doubt that the power of the frost wind blade had increased tremendously. Previously, only the trees that were cut in half would be frozen. Now, not only were the trees that were cut in half, but the trees within a few meters of the frost wind blade were also frozen. The power of the frost wind blade had indeed increased, and by a lot. The power of the frost wind blade had increased from the ordinary murderous level to the mad level. It was even more powerful than the wind blade. After all, the Ice Soul Beast had merged with the ice ability of the special Ice Soul Beast. Good. Just as I expected, the Ice Soul Beast merged with the Frost Wind Blade and increased its power. Gray heaved a sigh of relief. The Ice Soul Beast's ice ability had indeed merged with the Frost Wind Blade and increased its power. There was no phenomenon of the Ice Soul Beast's ice ability existing on its own. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, swallowing the Ice Soul Beast's blood would have been meaningless. If he wanted to have the most powerful attack in the mad level, he already had it. The Jasper Lizard's plant ability was such an ability. If the Ice Soul Beast's ice ability existed on its own, it would at most give him one more attack method. Although it would increase his combat strength, it would not be significant. However, it was different when it merged with the Frost Wind Blade. The power of the Frost Wind Blade was already at the mad level. Now, with the addition of the special mad level ice ability, the power of the Frost Wind Blade had increased tremendously. According to his estimation, his most powerful attack right now was probably no longer his plant ability, but when he used the Ice Wind Blade with all his strength. The Wind Blade ability was already at the mad level. If it merged with the special mad level ice ability, its power would definitely surpass the special mad level plant ability. Wild Wind Blade. Swish, swish, swish. Thinking of this, he activated the Wild Wind Wolf Blood Beast ability that he had gained after reaching the mad level. Suddenly, dozens of green frost wind blades whizzed out and swept toward the forest in front of him. Puff, puff, crack, crack. After the attack, a world of ice and snow appeared in front of Gray. All the trees in the arc-shaped area were cut down and collapsed. The fallen trees were all turned into ice sculptures. Looking at this scene, it was as if he was in a world of ice and snow. A world of ice and snow in this area. Gray narrowed his eyes. He thought of the use of the enhanced Wild Wind Wolf Blood Beast ability. The newly formed ability not only had the ability to cut through the wind, but it also had the ability to freeze the ice. In this area, even if one could avoid the cutting of the wind blade, it would be difficult to avoid the spread of the cold air. In other words, if one could not escape from this area in an instant, there would be no way to escape from this ability. The ice ability has been greatly enhanced. Its power has surpassed the plant ability. The Wild Wind Blade now should be called the Wild Wind Ice Blade. Gray's face showed a hint of joy. From now on, his most powerful attack method would be the mutated Wild Wind Ice Blade, not the plant ability. Its power has surpassed the special Blood Beast ability, but it is still a bit away from the barbarian level. He could not help but think of the last battle with the three-headed snake. Judging from the destructive power at that time, the power of the Wild Wind Ice Blade was still a bit away from the barbarian level. However, the gap between them wasn't that big. Gray estimated that once he enhanced the wind elemental ability of the Frigid Ice Blade to the level of a special Blood Fiend, the power of the Frigid Ice Blade would be enhanced to the level of a barbarian. I must take the blood of the special Wind Blood Beast, but now I only have the blood of the Knife Weasel. Should I take the blood of the Knife Weasel? Chapter 239. I can only take the blood of the Knife Weasel. The Knife Weasel was the special blood fiend that Gray, Sophia, and Teresa had jointly killed. The limit of its ability was the mad level. After reaching the barbarian level, it would be eliminated. Gray felt that it was a pity that he had to use the blood of the knife weasel once. The blood warrior cultivation system of this world did not allow unlimited improvement after the implantation of a bloodline. Instead, each bloodline had its own limit. Once the limit was reached, a higher-level bloodline had to be implanted in order to continue to improve. It was a bit like the genetic modification of animals that existed in science fiction movies in his previous life. A person who had undergone genetic modification based on the genes of a wolf would have a maximum physical quality that was comparable to that of a wolf, but would not surpass it. Because of this reason, the ability that Gray obtained from swallowing the blood of the blood fiends also had its own growth limit. Once this limit was exceeded, it would be difficult for the ability to grow. Except for a few abilities that could help Gray to a certain extent, even if they did not grow, such as reverse nurturing, shadow ability, and infrared perception, other abilities were bound to be eliminated as Gray's strength increased. Elimination was inevitable. The only thing Gray could do was to take the blood of a higher-level blood fiend every time he took it, so as to delay the elimination. The knife weasel bloodline was obviously the kind of bloodline that would be eliminated in a short period of time. Therefore, Gray did not want to take the blood of the knife weasel unless it was absolutely necessary. There are still 5 months left. Let's see if I can find a more suitable bloodline in these 5 months. If he could not find a higher-level special wind bloodline in these 5 months, Gray could only choose to take the blood of the knife weasel. Although it was a bit wasteful, it was acceptable to waste a little compared to the leaps and bounds in his strength. Young Master Gray. Young Master Gray. After leaving the forest and returning to the castle, Gray walked into the castle hall under the respectful greetings of the castle servants. Young Master Gray, the Viscount was looking for you just now. Barbara, who was standing in the middle of the hall and seemed to have been waiting for him, came forward and greeted him respectfully. Did he say what he wanted? Gray asked. No, I just want you to go to the gazebo in the garden if you come back. Oh. Gray nodded and walked towards the garden pavilion. He's here. In the garden pavilion, there were many tables, chairs, and tea tables. Viscount Fergus and the other members of the Fergus family were all present. They were all wearing smiles, and the atmosphere was rather harmonious. Seeing Gray arrive, Viscount Fergus waved his hand and said with a smile on his face, Yes. Gray nodded and sat down beside Sarah. As soon as he sat down, the latter came over and said with a smile, Let's go. Sister Bernice is pregnant. Pregnant? Gray looked in surprise at Bernal, who had a blissful smile on her face, and then looked at Bernal, who was grinning from ear to ear. Congratulations. The grudge between him and Bernal had long been resolved. Now that he heard that Bernal's wife was pregnant, he congratulated him from the bottom of his heart. Thank you. Bernal smiled in response. Sister Bernice is pregnant. Today, we must have a sumptuous meal to celebrate. I suggest we eat the blood fiend steak. Sarah cheered from the side, causing Gray and the others to smile kindly. The flesh of blood fiends was not only rich in nutrients, but after special processing, it would also become abnormally delicious. Gray had brought back a lot of blood fiend meat the last time, and it was all mad-grade blood fiend meat. It was needless to say how delicious it was. After eating it once, Sarah clearly liked it. From time to time, she would encourage them to have a sumptuous meal. Get the kitchen to prepare it. Viscount Fergus faintly smiled and gave an order to a servant beside him. The servant respectfully acknowledged and left. Not long after, the servant returned, but there was a middle-aged man with him. The man was the butler of the Fergus family, Nick. He walked to Viscount Fergus's side and spoke. Lord Viscount, we just received news from my phone town that a group of suspicious people have settled down in the town. They arrived about half a month ago, and the timing just matches. I understand. You may leave first. Viscount Fergus nodded and waved his hand, indicating for the servant to leave. His brows were slightly furrowed. Gray looked at him in confusion and asked, Father, did something happen in the territory recently? Yes, something did happen. Viscount Fergus nodded. Since about 10 days ago, people have been disappearing in the territory. I ordered everyone in the territory to pay attention to suspicious people. Just now, news came from my hometown that a group of suspicious people had been discovered. Currently, Bernal is following up on this matter. But now that Bernice is pregnant, he needs to spend more time with her. It seems that I need you to go over and investigate this group of people. No problem. Gray nodded in agreement, and then said again, don't worry. Who are the missing people? They're all young girls. All young girls. Green raised an eyebrow. Yes, all young girls. If I'm not mistaken, it should be the work of mercenaries. After you go over, don't alert this group of people. Secretly investigate before taking action. Viscount Fergus said. I understand. Gray nodded. The nobles of this world knew how to enjoy themselves. Some of the more debauched nobles would collect beautiful young girls for their own enjoyment. Some mercenary groups had their eyes on the huge profits and would engage in human trafficking. The missing people this time were all young girls. If there were no surprises, they should have been captured by a mercenary group that trafficked in human beings. The nobles would never forgive such mercenaries if they were discovered. After all, population was the foundation of a territory. If the disappearance of people caused a riot and caused a loss of population, the consequences would be severe. They actually trafficked young girls. How can there be such mercenaries? Caroline frowned, her face full of disgust. Bernice also frowned. These mercenaries are really bad people. Sarah also frowned. Then she turned her eyes and shook Gray's hand. Big brother, take me with you. Next time, Gray raised an eyebrow. He was not worried that something would happen to Sarah. With him, a berserker, there would naturally be no such thing. It was just that this time he was going to secretly investigate that group of people and not go on an outing. If he followed, he would inevitably suffer. No, Sarah shook her head like a wave. Okay, I can take you, but you have to listen to my orders. Gray's face became serious as he said seriously. I know. Sarah hurriedly nodded. Viscount Fergus saw that Gray agreed to let Sarah go with him and had no intention of stopping him. It was just an ordinary disappearance. It should be done by a small mercenary group. Otherwise, he would not have handed it over to Bernal. With a berserker like Gray taking action, there would naturally be no mistakes. After lunch, Gray and Sarah sat in an ordinary carriage and headed to my hometown in the south of the territory. My hometown was one of the few towns that Viscount Fergus led. It was the most important source of food for the Fergus family and provided a large amount of income for the Fergus family every year. Because he did not want to alert the enemy, Gray did not bring any guards with him. He even changed his carriage to an ordinary one. With his strength, he did not need any soldiers to deal with these mercenaries. Furthermore, my hometown was a town with a population of thousands and an important source of food. The Fergus family naturally had soldiers stationed here. Even if they needed soldiers, they only needed to dispatch them from my hometown. In the afternoon, the carriage drove into the house of the town's mayor. Quick, quick, greet young Master Gray and Miss Sarah. The town's mayor was an old man in his 60s. He had seen Gray and Sarah at the Fergus family's New Year's banquet before. Seeing Gray and Selina arrive, he hurriedly brought his family and bowed to Gray and Selina. He had thought that it would be young Master Bernal who would come this time. He did not expect it to be young Master Gray. He could not help but feel excited. Among the young masters and young mistresses of the Fergus family, it was obvious who had the most power. If his family's descendants could be valued by this young master, the benefits would be obvious. Young Master Gray. Miss Sarah. Behind him, there were two middle-aged couples, 2 young men, 2 young women, and 1 young man. They all bowed respectfully to Gray and Selina. Gray nodded slightly and looked at the few of them. He finally returned to the old man and said, We came this time secretly. This time we came here quietly. Don't spread the news of us. Understood, understood. The old man nodded repeatedly. How are those people doing now? They are still in their residence. In order not to alarm them, we did not send anyone to monitor them. We only know that they have been leaving the town every day for the past few days. Sometimes they come back on the same day. Sometimes they come back the next day. We don't know where they went. The old man hurriedly said, Prepare a set of ordinary clothes for each of us, and then have someone bring us over to take a look. Gray thought for a moment and ordered, Half an hour later, Gray and Sarah, who were dressed in ordinary clothes, were led by one of the two young men from before to a remote street at the edge of the town. Young Master Gray, they live there. The young man looked at a house in the distance and said. Gray's gaze followed the other party's gaze and saw a slightly old and dilapidated house. This house belongs to a poor family in the town. These people bought it at a high price. Let's go. Gray took a look and did not stay for too long. He brought Sarah and casually strolled around the town before returning to the mayor's house. He planned to come over at night to check if these people were the human traffickers he was looking for. Chapter 240. At night, the town was dark, with only sporadic lights coming out of the houses. Gray and Sarah came out of the mayor's house, wearing a long coat and holding a simple rune lamp. They walked towards the house they had observed before. Brother, what should I do later? It was the first time she had encountered such a situation. The little girl Sarah was obviously quite excited, touching the sword hanging at her waist as she asked Gray. After her strength reached the level of a low-level blood warrior, although she had sparred with Gray and the others, she had yet to have actual combat experience. Obviously, she was eager for the opportunity to fight. You don't have to do anything. Gray rolled his eyes. He was only here to investigate, not to kill people. After all, he was still not sure if the disappearance of the girls was caused by this group of people. How can it be like this? The little girl suddenly pouted and said with dissatisfaction. She had originally planned to show her strength and kill the bad mercenaries with her sword, but when she heard from Gray that she did not have to do anything, she immediately became dispirited. Don't worry, there will be a chance for you to act. Glancing at her, Gray said, I'm still investigating the disappearance of the girls to see if it has anything to do with them. If it does, I'll leave one for you when I act. Relying on the light of the rune lamp, the two of them came to the house they had been to before. In the house in the distance, there were faint lights coming out. The people in the house should not be resting yet. You stay here and watch for me. I'll go over and see if I can hear any useful information. If someone comes, shake the rune lamp left and right to alert me. Handing the rune lamp to Sarah, Gray walked towards the house. Huff! Walking to the side of the house and leaning against the wall, Gray immediately heard the sound of talking and the clinking of glasses in the house. Damn it, this town doesn't even have a place to pass the time. A man who sounded slightly drunk said, What? Can't hold it anymore. Another man chuckled with a meaningful smile. You can hold it in? The man in front retorted. Hee hee, you don't say. I really can't hold it in. A man chuckled. All right, everyone bear with it. We'll leave in a few days. At that time, I'll treat everyone to a good time. A middle-aged man's voice rang out. Immediately, the others burst into cheers, and the sound of wine glasses clinking could be heard. Outside the house, Gray, who was leaning against the wall, raised his eyebrows slightly. He felt that there was something wrong with this group of people. From the tone of this group of people, they should have come to the town to do something, but he didn't know if the other party's matter was to kidnap and sell young girls. After listening for another half an hour, Gray didn't get any useful information, so he quietly left the room. How is it? What do you think? Seeing that Gray had returned, Sarah asked anxiously. I'm not sure yet. Let's follow them when they leave town tomorrow and see what they're up to. Gray shook his head. Then what should we do now? The little girl's face was filled with disappointment. Go back. The next morning, a group of people headed out of the town. There were a total of 7 people. Although they were dressed like ordinary civilians from the slightly bulging clothes, the 7 of them should be the kind of people who often train their bodies and have stronger muscles than ordinary people. Leaving the town, the 7 of them walked forward while looking back from time to time to check if there was anyone following behind them. They were very cautious. After they walked a long way out of the town, 2 figures walked out of the woods next to the town. They looked in the direction of the 7 people and quietly followed. The 2 were Gray and Sarah. Sneaking around. I know they're not good people at first glance. Looking at the 7 people who kept looking back, Sarah couldn't help but snort. Because she had to follow these 7 people, she had already been pulled out of bed by Gray before the sun had even risen. She had never woken up so early before and was a little grumpy. Obviously, she was very dissatisfied with the group of people who made her wake up early. Let's go. You'll have a chance to vent your anger later. Gray chuckled and followed him. A few hours later, the two followed the 7 people and arrived outside a village. Captain, this is the village. Among the 7 people, a man with a strong physique looked in the direction of the village and said, "How does she look?" A middle-aged man with a slightly disgusting birthmark on his face asked, "Don't you know my taste? She's absolutely beautiful. She can definitely sell for a good price." The man with a strong physique laughed. The middle-aged man nodded and asked again, "Does she leave the village at noon every day to deliver food to the fields?" "Yes, after my observation over the past few days, she leaves the village at noon every day to deliver food to the fields." The man with a strong physique replied, "Which road did she take?" "The one over there." "Let's go. Wait for her on the road." The 7 of them quietly left the village and finally hid in the bushes beside a small country road. In the woods far away from the 7 people, Gray and Sarah paid attention to the woods where the 7 people hid. She's really not a good person. When they arrived outside the village, the 7 people did not enter the village. Instead, they secretly peeped and finally hid in the woods next to a small road. Seeing the 7 people like this, Sarah was even more certain of her guess. She's really not a good person. Gray nodded in agreement. Sneaking around was indeed not something a normal person would do. These 7 people were really up to no good. At noon, on the road where the 7 people were lying in ambush, a young girl wearing coarse clothes and carrying a basket appeared. The young girl had long brown hair tied into a ponytail behind her back. She had a beautiful face and was about 16 or 17 years old. Her body was already curvaceous and her skin was somewhat fair. If she took off her coarse clothes and changed into the clothes of a noble lady, no one would doubt that she was a noble lady. Humph, 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 humph. The young girl seemed to be in a good mood. She carried the basket forward and hummed a song, just as she passed by a thicket of trees. Suddenly, 7 people rushed out of the bush and quickly rushed toward her. The 7 people had a clear division of labor. One of them covered her mouth, one grabbed her hands, and one grabbed her feet, while the other looked around to keep a lookout. Clatter! The basket in her hand fell to the ground, and the food in the basket fell to the ground. Woo-woo! She panicked and wanted to call for help, but her mouth was covered. Then, she was carried by the 3 people and quickly dragged into the bush. Bad guys. Seeing the young girl about her age being caught by the 7 people, Sarah's beautiful face was filled with anger. She immediately drew her sword and was about to rush toward the 7 people. Wait a minute. However, Gray pulled her back and shook his head. Now is not the time to make a move. Why? Sarah was puzzled. You don't want to save the others? Gray looked in the direction of the 7 people and narrowed his eyes. When the 7 people returned to the town, they returned empty-handed. It was obvious that they did not bring the young girl back. This meant that these people must have hidden the young girl somewhere. Now that the 7 people had taken the young girl, they must be heading to the hiding place. If he followed them, he could save the young girls. Although he could probably find out where the young girls were hidden after interrogating the 7 people, Gray did not want to go through the trouble. After all, interrogating someone was very tiring. If he met someone who was stubborn, they would not say anything no matter how he tortured them. Although such people were rare, they were not non-existent. After a while, the young girl was tied up and gagged. She was put into a cloth bag and carried by the 7 people in a certain direction. A few hours later, the 7 people took turns carrying the young girl and entered a forest not far from my hometown. They came to the side of a mountain. There was a naturally formed cave on the side of the mountain. Who is it? Captain, you're here. There were people in the cave. When the 7 people arrived near the cave, they were immediately alerted. After confirming that it was the 7 people, the alerted voices stopped. It was obvious that this cave was where the 7 people were hiding the young girls and had people guarding it. Carrying the cloth bag, the 7 people walked into the cave. In the cave, there were 2 men and 8 young girls who were tied up. You caught some good stuff again? One of the 2 guards looked at the struggling sack and said with a smile, Yes, definitely good stuff. We can definitely sell it for a good price. One of the 7 people laughed. Oh, then we have to take a look. What a good figure. I can't help it. Looking at the young girl released from the cloth bag, One of the men stretched out his hand and touched the young girl's chest. The young girl screamed in fear, but he did not care. Instead, he was full of excitement. You could take advantage of her, but don't really do her. Another person joked, "Those nobles like things that others haven't used before. If they've been used, then they're worthless. The price will be several times lower." I know. Didn't I hold it in? It's just a bit tiring. When money was mentioned, the eyes of the man in front lit up. "Hold on for a few more days. We'll leave when we get 10. The middle-aged man said. Speaking up to here, his face suddenly changed as he looked towards the entrance of the cave and shouted loudly, "What is it? Who is it?" His eyes were sharp, and he was full of killing intent. "Someone." "What someone?" When the others heard his shout, their expressions changed drastically. They stared in the direction of the cave entrance, their hands reaching for the weapons hanging on their bodies. Tap, tap, tap. Under the nervous gazes of the few people, Gray walked into the cave with Sarah. His gaze swept across the 9 of them and finally landed on the girls who were tied up behind them. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. "You dare to kidnap and sell young girls in the Fergus family's territory. You have guts." Chapter 241. Who are you people? Looking at the young man and woman in front of him, the scarred man's heart was on high alert. Only a fool would dare to take the initiative to show himself when there were 9 of them here. Otherwise, he would have sufficient confidence. Although the 2 of them were wearing very ordinary clothes made of coarse cloth, the fact that they could follow them all the way here already showed that they were not simple people. The people who will kill you. Gray's face was cold, his eyes cold. Selling humans as livestock was simply inhumane. They could no longer be called humans. Of course, what angered Gray the most was that these young girls who were being sold as livestock were for the Fergus family's territory. To a noble family, the population of the territory was equivalent to their private property. These people abducting and selling young girls from the Fergus family's territory was an infringement on the Fergus family's interests. Otherwise, even if he knew that mercenaries who trafficked in human beings were roaming around somewhere, he would not be so kind as to find these mercenaries and kill them. After all, that was someone else's territory and had nothing to do with him. If he encountered them, he could just kill them, but he did not have the energy to deliberately spend time looking for them. There were too many bad people in this world. He did not have the time to deal with them one by one. Kill us? With just you 2 little kids? A rather muscular man with a face full of contempt pulled out a machete and pounced towards Gray and the girl. I'll do it. Seeing the muscular man pouncing towards them, Sarah's eyes lit up. She pulled out the sword at her waist and went up to meet him. She was full of resentment towards these human traffickers. Not only did they cause her to get up early, but the most despicable thing was that the traffickers were young girls around her age. Clang! With a sweep of her sword, she had already blocked the aggressive saber of the burly man. She had even forced the burly man to take a few steps back. Low-rank blood warrior. This young girl is a low-rank blood warrior. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed. Although the muscular man's strength was not yet that of a low-rank blood warrior, he was close. This young girl was able to block his attack and make the muscular man suffer a little. Her strength had definitely reached that of a low-rank blood warrior. To have the strength of a low-level blood warrior at such a young age, this girl was most likely from a noble family. The expression on his face kept changing. In the end, it turned into a ruthless look as he gritted his teeth and said, "Go." The consequences of attacking the nobles were severe, but they had been discovered to be trafficking young girls, so the consequences were equally severe. If he could make these 2 nobles stay and take the opportunity to escape, he might have a chance to survive. The other 7 men had obviously sensed that something was amiss. Upon hearing his command, they drew their weapons one after another. 3 of them surrounded Sarah, while the other 4 surrounded Gray. Gray sneered and stepped in front of the 3 people who were about to besiege Sarah. When one of them saw Gray blocking their way, he raised his axe and swung it at Gray. The huge axe heavily chopped down, and the falling axe brought with it a strong gust of wind. He was one of the 2 low-level blood warriors among them. Puff! But before his axe could chop down, a blue sword had already slashed across his throat. His downward chopping motion paused. His eyes were filled with shock, and he fell to the ground lifelessly. The strength of a low-rank blood warrior was no different from an ordinary person in front of Gray now. Barry, seeing that their companion with the strength of a low-rank blood warrior had been killed so easily, the other two men's expressions changed drastically. They hurriedly swung the weapons in their hands at Gray. Gray took a small step back and dodged the two men's weapons. Then he took a step forward, and the sword in his hand slashed out horizontally. Puff, puff. The two men were about the same height. The blue sword first slashed across the throat of one of the men, and then the throat of the other man. The two men maintained a terrified expression on their faces. Their bodies went limp and fell to the ground. How could this be? The four men who had rushed toward Gray saw that Gray was shielding Sarah, so they also rushed toward him. But halfway there, they saw that their three companions in front of them had been killed by Gray, as if they were vegetables. A deep chill struck the four men's hearts. There was a low-rank blood warrior among the three of them, but he was killed so easily. What kind of strength was this? Could he be a middle-rank blood warrior like their captain? Smack! The four men stopped in their actions, but Gray did not. He took a step forward and quickly came in front of the four men, thrusting his sword straight out. Puff! The man closest to Gray had his heart pierced right through. The sword was pulled out, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The man fell with a plop. The other three men finally reacted. They hurriedly swung their weapons at Gray. The three weapons attacked Gray together. Bang! Gray bent back slightly, dodging the three men's weapons. Then he kicked out, instantly landing a kick on the man in the middle. Crack! The sound of bones breaking rang out. The man flew backward like a cannonball. He hit the rock wall and fell to the ground. He spat out a mouthful of blood, even his internal organs. It was obvious that he would not survive. Gray retracted his foot and raised his sword, sweeping it at a valiant man holding a sword. This man should have the strength of a low-rank blood warrior. His reaction speed was obviously faster than the other man's. After Gray bent to avoid the attack, he had already taken a step forward, ready to attack Gray. At this moment, behind Gray, a dagger stabbed at Gray's back. The attacker was the middle-aged man. His attack was quite swift, much faster than the others. The strength of a middle-rank blood warrior was unmistakable. Puff! Gray suddenly turned around, his long sword sweeping out. A blue light flashed. The middle-aged man's right hand, which was holding the dagger, was suddenly cut off at the wrist. Blood gushed out wildly. Then, a leg swept the middle-aged man's waist like a whirlwind. The middle-aged man was directly swept away, slamming hard into the rock wall. At this moment, the sword in the valiant man's hand was about to pierce Gray's body. "Brother, watch out!" Sarah, who was suppressing the brawny man with the strength of a low-rank blood warrior, saw the sword coming from behind Gray and immediately warned him in shock. In response, Gray just turned around, his long sword sweeping out. Puff! The valiant man who swung his sword at Gray was cut in half at the waist. Blood spurted out wildly as he fell down. The last man among the four held an axe above his head. His whole body was trembling, not knowing whether to strike or not. The strength of the person in front of him was so strong that it made him despair. Even the leader could not block a single strike from him. Puff! Against this man, Gray did not hold back at all. He directly stabbed out, piercing the man's heart. Don't be distracted. With no more opponents left standing, Gray looked in the direction of Sarah. He could not help but remind her when he saw that the little girl was almost injured because she had warned him earlier. However, Sarah was a low-rank blood warrior after all. Her strength was stronger than the brawny man, and she slowly gained the upper hand again. Seeing that she had gained the upper hand, Gray turned his gaze in the direction of the rock wall. There, the middle-aged man was bleeding from the corner of his mouth. He struggled to stand up, but he failed several times. Gray walked over, his gaze cold as he looked at the man. Judging from the attitude of these people towards the middle-aged man, just now, this man should be the leader. The strength of a middle-rank blood warrior was stronger than the others. This also showed that this man was the strongest among them. However, he was only a middle-rank blood warrior. If he really wanted to kill him, he naturally would not let him live. The reason why he did not kill him immediately was because he still had something to ask. There should be a total of 11 girls who were kidnapped by you. Where are the other 2 girls? Gray asked coldly. According to the Fergus family statistics, there were 11 girls who had gone missing in the past 10 days, including the one who was captured today. However, there were only 9 of them here. This was also the reason why he had spared their lives for the time being. The middle-aged man's right arm was broken, and his ribs were injured by Gray's kick. At this moment, not only was his body covered in blood, but there was also blood at the corner of his mouth. He was extremely miserable. Hearing Gray's question, he raised his head with difficulty and said, "Let me go, and I'll tell you where they are. You have no right to negotiate with me." Gray sneered, walked forward, and stomped on the man's left foot. Crack! The sound of bones breaking was heard. A small section of the man's left leg bone was crushed by Gray's stomp. "If you don't talk, I don't mind crushing all the bones in your body." As he spoke, Gray's foot once again stomped on the man's undamaged leg. "Unless you..." I'll talk." The middle-aged man's forehead was covered in cold sweat from the bone-piercing pain. He felt that Gray was not joking, so he quickly spoke. "The McIntosh family. Someone from the McIntosh family came yesterday, and I sold them to the McIntosh family." The McIntosh family. Hearing this family, Gray raised his eyebrows. He naturally knew about the McIntosh family, and he even had some dealings with this family. Last time, the Evelyn's family asked for his help because they were fighting over the iron mine. The McIntosh family was the one fighting over the iron mine with the Evelyn's family. He originally thought that he would not have any dealings with this family, but he did not expect to meet them again. After thinking about it, Gray did not kill the man immediately. After all, he was not sure if the man was lying. He looked in the direction of Sarah. He saw that Sarah had already killed the man, and her face was very pale as she retched. It was not the first time she saw a dead person, but it was the first time she killed someone. The two were obviously not the same. Gray walked over, patted her back, and said gently, "Go outside and get some fresh air." Unlike Viscount Fergus, who did not intend to let the girl experience actual combat, Gray wanted to let Sarah have some actual combat experience. He did not expect her to go to the battlefield in the future, but he wanted her to at least have the ability to protect herself at a critical moment. After Sarah left, Gray cut the ropes that tied the 9 girls and looked at the 9 girls who were pale from seeing the dead man. "Okay, you are free." Chapter 242. This is near my phone town. If you know the way, you can leave now. If you don't, I can get someone to send you back. Gray sized up the 9 girls. Of the 9 girls, some were petite and cute, some were tall and slender, and some were well-developed and curvy. Without exception, they were all beautiful. This was why the 9 mercenaries had their eyes on them. In this world, having beauty but not having the ability to protect oneself was sometimes a disaster. Free? Are we really free? Among the 9 girls, the earliest one had been captured for more than 10 days. After the initial hope, they had already lost all hope and thought that they could not escape their tragic fate. Now that someone suddenly told them that they were free, they felt a little unconfident and felt that what was happening in front of them was not real. "Yes, you are free." Gray nodded again. "That's great. Thank you, sir." Some of the girls were so emotional that they shed tears, while others looked at Gray with eyes full of gratitude. "Sir, may I know who you are?" The girl who was captured today mustered up her courage and asked Gray. "I am Gray Fergus of the Fergus family." "All right, the smell here is not good. Everyone come out first." Lifting the middle-aged man with one hand, Gray called out to the 9 people and walked out. The small cave was filled with the smell of blood. It was indeed not a comfortable environment. The 9 girls looked at the corpses on the ground and recovered from the joy of freedom. Their faces turned pale again as they hurriedly walked out. When they returned to the town and saw a large number of strangers walking on the streets, the 9 of them finally believed that they were free and woke up from their nightmare. They were so emotional that they thanked Gray again and again. In the end, 3 of the 9 girls, including the girl who was captured today, left the town and returned home. The other 6 girls were escorted by my Foamtown soldiers under Gray's arrangement. "Young Master Gray, we have interrogated them." The remaining 2 girls were sold to the McIntosh family. The young man who led the way for Gray and the girl yesterday came in front of Gray and reported respectfully. His name was Barnett, the son of the mayor's eldest son. Yes, Gray nodded. It seemed that the middle-aged man was not lying. Young Master Gray, how should we deal with this mercenary? Kill him. Naturally, there was nothing much to say to mercenaries who engaged in human trafficking. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to verify the authenticity of the news, he would have killed them on the spot. Yes, Barnett responded respectfully and left. Brother, what should we do now? Sarah had already recovered, but her face was still a little pale, and she was not as lively as before. To the McIntosh family, Gray said with a cold look in his eyes. The McIntosh family. If there is nothing important, no one is allowed to disturb me. Baron McIntosh, who was dressed in noble attire and had a slightly plump figure, closed the door of the room and went straight to the big bed in the bedroom. On the big bed in the bedroom, there were two young girls wearing exquisite clothes. They were hugging their legs and sitting on the bed. This pair of girls was bought from the middle-aged mercenary. I just bought it yesterday. He was not interested in directly dealing with the two girls who were wearing coarse clothes and were dressed in rustic clothes. So he asked the maids to train them and dress them up. He walked up and carefully looked at the two girls. Her coarse clothes had been taken off and replaced with beautiful, translucent silk clothes. Her original long braids had also been meticulously groomed. When they were spread out, they became soft and beautiful. Their faces were also put on makeup, making them look more delicate and beautiful. After the two girls were dressed up, they were obviously much prettier than when they were just bought. He could not help but feel a wave of heat in his heart. Come here. He walked over and waved at one of the girls who had developed earlier and had a chest like a small mountain. The initial training was obviously effective. Although the girl was trembling and her eyes were full of fear, she still slowly moved over. He pulled the girl into his arms without hesitation and reached out to touch her through the thin clothes. The fullness in his hands made him extremely excited. He grabbed the girl's clothes and was about to tear them apart. Thump, thump, thump. At this moment, there was a sudden rush of knocking on the door. His hand that was grabbing the girl's clothes suddenly trembled, and he subconsciously retracted it. He stood up angrily, his face full of anger as he asked in dissatisfaction, "What's the matter?" Hearing his master's anger, the person outside the door had a bitter expression. Of course, he knew what his master was doing now, but this time, he really had to report it, so he could only bite the bullet and say, "Master, young Master Gray of the Fergus family is here." What? Gray Fergus is here? Why is he here? Sure enough, after hearing the report, Baron McIntosh's anger immediately subsided. He even felt a chill in his heart and suddenly had a bad premonition. He had ordered someone to buy these two girls from Viscount Fergus's territory. Now that Gray Fergus was here, he suddenly had a bad premonition. Young Master Gray, it's the McIntosh family's honor to be able to receive your visit. He left the room and came to the living room. Seeing the overly young man between the man and woman in the living room, he said with a smile on his face. Seeing the other party smile, Sarah frowned with a look of disgust. Gray, on the other hand, was too lazy to feign civility and said directly, "Baron McIntosh, please hand over the two girls that you bought from Viscount Fergus's territory." Young Master Gray, is there a misunderstanding? I've never bought any girls. Baron McIntosh's heart thumped. His previous guess was confirmed. He stabilized his expression and said with a confused look, "Baron McIntosh, since I dare to say this, I'm naturally sure that the people are here." Gray stared at him with a cold face. "I'm too lazy to care about the dirty affairs of your McIntosh family, and I don't want to care, but you can't touch the people of Viscount Fergus's territory." Seeing that Gray had made it clear, the smile on Baron McIntosh's face disappeared. His expression was cold as he looked at Gray and snorted. "Gray Fergus, your Fergus family may be a Viscount family, but my McIntosh family is not easy to bully. Don't go too far." "Too far? So what if I go too far?" Gray laughed disdainfully and looked at him with contempt. Although he never liked to bully others, he didn't mind using his power to oppress people like this. "You?" Baron McIntosh's eyes were extremely gloomy. If it was the Fergus family a few years ago, he naturally wouldn't be afraid. Although the McIntosh family was a baron family, they had a very deep background. The previous head of the family was already a ferocious blood warrior and wasn't necessarily worse than the Fergus family. But it was different now. The Fergus family today was too strong. Grey Fergus was only a little over 19 years old, but it was rumored that he already had the strength of a ferocious blood warrior. Including Viscount Fergus, who was also a ferocious blood warrior. There were 2 ferocious blood warriors in the family. Not only that, but it was also revealed that they had 2 berserk blood fiends. Even a Count family like the Smalley family had to be wary, let alone the Mackinac family. I'll say it again. Hand it over. Otherwise, it would be a little rough if I had to look for it myself. Gray stomped on the ground with his heel. With a cracking sound, a long crack appeared on the floor of the living room. Looking at the long crack, Baron McIntosh's pupils shrank. It was rumored that the other party had the strength of a ferocious blood warrior. Now it seemed that it was true. His expression changed again and again. Finally, he took a deep breath as if to suppress the anger in his heart. He looked at the housekeeper beside him and berated him. "What are you waiting for? Bring them here." Not long after, 2 young girls dressed in thin silk clothes were brought over. Their faces were filled with confusion and fear. Their gazes were uneasy as they sized up their surroundings. "Are you people from Viscount Fergus territory?" Gray looked at the 2 of them. The 2 young girls were rather beautiful, even more beautiful than the girls in the cave. It was no wonder that the Mackinac family wanted to buy them. Yes, the 2 of them were filled with doubts and uneasiness, but they still answered, "Let's go." Gray did not bother to look at Baron McIntosh, whose expression was extremely ugly. He called for Sarah and left with the 2 young girls. He was not worried that the Mackinac family would take revenge on the Fergus family. As long as the Mackinac family was not stupid, they would definitely not think of taking revenge on the Fergus family. The difference in strength between the 2 families could no longer be calculated. If they really dared to take revenge, he did not mind letting the Mackinac family understand what was called a hopeless difference in strength. The carriage traveled towards Fergus Castle. Within the carriage, there were 2 young girls, one with brown hair and one with brown hair, wearing thin muslin clothes. They leaned against each other, as if this could alleviate the panic and uneasiness in their hearts. Gray said after taking out 2 coats for the 2 of them to put on, "You don't have to be nervous. We are from Viscount Fergus family. Once we reach Fergus Castle, I will have someone send you home." "Send us home?" The 2 young girls looked at each other, their eyes filled with surprise and suspicion. "Yes, send you home." Gray nodded. After receiving a positive answer from Gale, the 2 young girls were filled with the excitement of surviving a calamity. However, he looked at them with a smile. The 2 young girls were both unfortunate and fortunate. Unfortunately, they were caught by human traffickers and sold to nobles. Fortunately, the nobles who bought them were not powerful nobles and were not the kind that the Fergus family could not afford to offend. Otherwise, Gray would have to give up on the 2 of them. "Sir," at this moment, the 2 young girls raised their heads as if they had made a decision. They looked at Gray with shining eyes. "Can you let us stay in the castle and work?" Chapter 243. Gray looked at the 2 of them in surprise, but he soon guessed their plan. He looked at them thoughtfully and said, "Let's go. What are your names?" "Marlene, Liana." The girl with brown hair and the girl with brown hair answered respectively. "The work in the castle is not easy. Are you sure you want to work in the castle?" He could roughly guess what they were thinking. After going through that disaster, they clearly understood that their families could not protect them, so they wanted to work in the castle in exchange for protection. "Yes, sir. Please let us work in the castle." "Okay. I will send you home to report your safety, and then I will bring you to work in the castle." Gray nodded in agreement. He did not lose anything by taking in 2 beautiful maids. The missing girls were perfectly solved. Gray and Sarah returned to Fergus Castle. He asked the head maid to arrange for the 2 girls to work in Fergus Castle. With Gray's current status in Fergus Castle, it was not a problem to arrange for 2 maids. And because it was Gray who arranged it, the 2 girls were given easier jobs than other maids. In Gray's training room in Fergus Castle, a 5-meter-long wolf-shaped blood fiend stood quietly. Its body was covered in green fur, and there were mysterious black patterns on both sides of its abdomen. Powerful. Majestic, mysterious. Whoosh, as Gray could not hold on any longer, he withdrew from the training state. The green wolf's figure slowly became blurred and finally disappeared completely. Gray, who was sweating profusely, stood up, took off a towel, and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He opened the door of the training room and saw that it was snowing outside like goose feathers falling from the sky. The roof of the castle, the walls, all the buildings were covered in a layer of white. It was a white world. Because of his cultivation, Gray's clothes were rather thin, and the chill seeped into his body. However, Gray did not feel cold. He only felt a slight coolness. After swallowing the Ice Soul Beast's blood, Gray's body had been modified. He had a strong resistance to the cold, so he was not affected by the cold at all. It was now November, and winter had arrived. The winter in this world was divided into 3 months: November, December, and January. It was slightly different from his previous world. "Young Master Gray, quickly put on your coat." The maid, Barbara, walked over quickly with a coat in her arms. Compared to the summer-made outfit, she was wearing a winter-made outfit with a lot more fluffy fur. Her beautiful figure could still be seen. As she got closer, a faint feminine fragrance wafted over. She walked in front of Gray and carefully put the coat on Gray. Gray smiled and didn't refuse, even though he wasn't cold. "Young Master Gray. Young Master Gray." Walking into the hall, the maids and maids were bustling around. When they saw Gray, they all saluted. Gray saw Marlene and Liana among them. They looked at Gray with gratitude. Gray smiled and nodded at them. After taking a hot bath, he took a book from the library and went to the warm room with a fireplace. He enjoyed the leisure time of winter with Sarah, Caroline, and the others. Gray enjoyed the luxurious life of a noble. It was very different from his previous life. They had personal maids, personal chefs, and personal servants to feed the horses. There were only a few of them, but he enjoyed the service of dozens of people. Of course, he also understood that the reason he could enjoy such a life was because he had great strength and sufficient power. It was because of these that he could live such a comfortable life. Knowing the relationship between the two, he naturally wouldn't be worn down by such a comfortable life. Clop, clop, clop. Heavy snow swirled in the air. A man in battle attire was riding a sturdy warhorse, galloping through the snow. The horse was panting heavily, its breath turning into white smoke. His battle attire and hair were covered with snow. He didn't wipe it off with his hands. Instead, he looked ahead. On the hillside in front of him, a castle covered in snow appeared. That was his destination, Fergus Castle. In the afternoon, Gray and Bernal were called to Viscount Fergus's study. The two opened the door and saw Viscount Fergus sitting in front of the desk with a solemn expression. On the desk was an opened envelope. The wax seal on the envelope was a blood beast with 3 sharp horns on its head. It was the emblem of the Sidney family. "Father, what is written in the letter?" Sensing that something might have happened, Bernal raised his eyebrows and asked. Today, he knew that a messenger from the Sidney family had come to the castle. The Sidney family has decided to take action against the Shadow Serpent. Viscount Fergus said, "Have they found the whereabouts of the Shadow Serpent?" Gray was deep in thought. Gray knew that the Sidney family had plans to destroy the Shadow Serpent. Once, when Zaloyan visited the Fergus family, he had mentioned it. However, almost a year had passed since then, and there was still no news. Gray originally thought that the Sidney family had given up. He didn't expect that they would suddenly take action. How does the Sidney family want the Fergus family to cooperate? Bernal asked. The Sidney family doesn't intend to gather too many people, and the fewer people who know about this, the better. The Fergus family only gathered Gray and me. The other families will probably only gather people whose strength has reached the ferocious blood warrior level. At this point, Viscount Fergus looked at Gray. Also, they want us to bring the Mad Class Blood Beast. Okay, Gray nodded. This was within his expectations. In order to take action against the Shadow Serpent, the stronger the combat strength, the better. Although the 4 Control Mad Class Blood Beasts couldn't use their Blood Beast abilities, it was absolutely no problem for them to contend against 2 ferocious blood warriors. The Mad Class Blood Beasts already had a huge impact on the battle. The Sidney family naturally wanted the Fergus family to bring out such powerful combat strength. Of course, after Grey's selection, the 4 Mad Class Blood Beasts' combat strength wasn't as simple as 2 ferocious blood warriors. The Windrider Leopard and the Copper Rhinoceros Blood Beast abilities were their physical bodies. They could fully display their strength as Mad Class Blood Beasts. 1 Blood Beast against 1 ferocious blood warrior was absolutely no problem. In addition, although the Jade Lizard couldn't use its Blood Beast abilities, it was still a special Blood Beast with powerful speed, defense, and strength. It had no problem contending against 1 ferocious blood warrior. Just these 3 blood beasts could already contend against 3 ferocious blood warriors. With the addition of the 4th Mad Class Blood Beast, their combat strength could be imagined. This time, the Sidney family annihilating the Shadow Serpent is also a good thing for us. Viscount Fergus continued. The Shadow Serpent has lost too many subordinates in our hands. Even 1 ferocious blood warrior died. I'm afraid that they have already reacted. In terms of hatred, the Shadow Serpent is not necessarily any weaker than the Sidney family towards our Fergus family. Hearing Viscount Fergus talk about the grudge between the Fergus family and the Shadow Serpent, Bernal couldn't help but tremble in his heart and said in a deep voice, "I hope that the Shadow Serpent can be annihilated this time." "I hope so." Grey raised his eyebrows slightly. The Shadow Serpent had a grudge with the Sidney family for decades. Until now, they were still free and unfettered and hadn't been annihilated. This already showed how difficult it was to deal with the Shadow Serpent. As for whether the Sidney family could succeed in taking action against the Shadow Serpent this time, although he wasn't without hope, he didn't have too much hope. After some discussion, they decided to set off tomorrow. In the evening, it was Grey's last night at Fergus Castle. Pushing open the bedroom door, the light from the oil lamp illuminated the room. On the bed in the bedroom, under the bedding, a slender figure could be faintly seen. Grey walked over. The figure on the bed sensed his arrival, lifted the blanket, and walked out of the bed, revealing a beautiful figure wearing thin clothes. The towering snow-white peaks could be faintly seen. This person was the maid in charge of warming the bed, Barbara. She walked in front of Grey and helped Grey take off his clothes and change into his pajamas. An alluring fragrance filled Grey's nose. Suddenly, Grey felt something soft and elastic touch his back. He turned his head and looked back, only to see the maid, Barbara, looking at him with misty eyes. Young Master Grey. After being together for a long time, she had long developed a deep admiration for Grey, who was different from the rest. In fact, it wasn't just her. There were many maids in the castle who admired Grey. Young, with a delicate and pretty appearance, possessing one of the strongest strength in the castle, and having an important position in Fergus Castle. All these qualities made him too attractive to these young maids who were at the age of fantasizing. Boom! It was as if something had been ignited in Grey's heart. He pulled Barbara over and pulled her beautiful figure into his embrace. Grey wasn't someone who could remain unruly. Being surrounded by so many beautiful maids, the only reason he had been holding himself back was because he was worried that he was too young and would easily harm his body. Taking off Barbara's thin clothes, her perfect figure was completely revealed in front of him. Grey took off his pajamas, gently hugged her, and removed the blanket. Chapter 244. Snowflakes fluttered in the air for an entire night. In the bedroom, 2 fiery bodies were entangled together. The next day, amidst the swirling snowflakes, the sky brightened, and Grey opened his eyes. He felt a slight weight on his hand. Turning his head to look, he saw Barbara, dressed in thin clothes, resting her head on his arm. Under her clothes, her towering peaks revealed a ravine. She was sleeping soundly, her face slightly rosy. She had transformed from a young girl to a young married woman, and the temptation her body emitted was even more intense. Grey could not help but be aroused again, but in the end, he restrained himself. As a berserker, her overly powerful body caused her to suffer a lot last night, and he really did not want to add to her pain. He only caressed her beautiful rosy face, an indescribable feeling rising in his heart. My previous life, in this one, I have finally gotten rid of the title of a virgin. In his previous life, he was a mediocre office worker. His meager salary made him feel slightly inferior. He was already in his 20s, but he still had not had a girlfriend. In this life, when he first took over this body, he was only around 16 years old. Although the surrounding resources were abundant, for the sake of his own body, he finally restrained himself. Now that he was almost 20 years old, there was naturally no need for him to restrain himself. He took the opportunity to complete this historical leap. He really wanted to accompany her like this and sleep until she woke up, but today he had to go to the Sydney family, so he had to wake up early. He gently pulled his hand out from under her head, but this action woke her up. Young Master Gray. Barbara looked at Gray with a slight blush on her face. She wanted to sit up and help Gray put on his clothes, but she suddenly frowned from the pain. Gray pressed her back on the bed and gently said, "You rest well. I can do it myself." After putting on his clothes and walking out of the bedroom, Gray waved to a passing maid and said, "Call the head maid over." The maid respectfully replied and left. Not long after, the head maid of the castle rushed over. The head maid, Maggie, was a middle-aged woman in her 30s. She had worked for the Fergus family for more than 10 years. Because of her conscientious work, the Fergus family made an exception and allowed her to continue working in the castle after marriage. Her husband and children were in Fergus City. "Young Master Gray, you were looking for me?" The head maid Maggie respectfully bowed to Gray when she arrived in front of Gray. "Yes." Gray nodded and then directly opened his mouth to speak. "Cancel all of Barbara's work, and then give her a maid and some custom-made clothes." "HM?" "Yes, young Master Gray." Head maid Margie was stunned at first, but she quickly realized what had happened. She couldn't help but think to herself, what a lucky girl. In the Fergus castle, many maids wanted to gain the favor of young Master Gray, the most powerful young master in the Fergus castle. Unexpectedly, Barbara was one of the lucky ones. From today onwards, Barbara's position in the castle would undergo an earth-shattering change. She would surpass the head maid in one leap and become one of the few people in the castle who needed to be served. Although it was unlikely that she would become young Master Gray's official wife due to her commoner status, and could only become one of his lovers, it was already an extremely high promotion. It was enough to guarantee her a lifetime of wealth. For maids of commoner origin, this was already an extremely fortunate thing. It was enough to make many maids envious, especially since Barbara was following young Master Gray, the one with the most potential in the Fergus family, who would definitely take control of the Fergus family in the future. This made the maids even more envious. After breakfast, Gray and Viscount Fergus set off for Sydney Castle in a carriage. Behind them were 3 carriages covered by huge canvases and containing 4 berserk blood fiends. In the carriage, Gray and Viscount Fergus sat opposite each other. Fergus glanced at Gray. He already knew what happened this morning, but he did not intend to say anything. With Gray's age, it was indeed the time. 2 days later, in the afternoon, Gray and Viscount Fergus arrived outside Sydney Castle. Under Zaloyan's welcome, the two entered Fergus Castle. Gray, not long after entering the residence arranged by the Sydney family, a blonde girl wearing a warm sweater that could not hide her beautiful figure greeted Gray, followed by 2 maids. "Miss Polly." Gray bowed to her and said, "Just call me Polly." Polly smiled. "Okay." Gray hesitated for a moment, but he still agreed. Polly had lived with the Fergus family for almost half a month and could be considered one of Gray's closest female friends. Since she had said so, he would not refuse. Seeing Gray agree, the smile on Polly's face widened a little, and then she asked, "Are you free now?" "Nothing." Gray shook his head, puzzled by the other party's intention. "That's good. Come with me. Last time, I promised to take you to the Sydney family's library. I'll take you there now." "Oh, okay." Gray hurriedly followed. He had long wanted to borrow the Sydney family's library, but due to various reasons, he had not been able to come to the Sydney family. This was an opportunity. Miss Polly. Miss Polly. Walking around the Sydney castle, Gray truly felt the vastness of the castle. It was several times larger than Fergus Castle. There were also many servants serving inside. On the way to the Sidney family's library, he could occasionally see busy male and female servants. Gray estimated that the number of servants in the castle should be in the hundreds. It had to be said that the upper-class nobles like the Sidney family lived a luxurious life that was a level higher than the Fergus family. Arriving at the library, what entered his eyes was a huge room with rows and rows of bookshelves. There were also 2 female servants in charge of the library. The bookshelves were filled with books with leather covers. A conservative estimate would say that there were at least tens of thousands of books here. The room was filled with a unique incense that came from the books. This was an antiseptic and insect-repellent incense that would allow the books to be preserved for a long time. "You want to read books about blood beasts?" Polly turned to look at Gray and asked. She clearly remembered that Gray had said that he liked to read books about blood beasts. Yes. Gray nodded. "Then can I recommend a few books for you?" "Thank you very much." Looking at the tens of thousands of books in front of him, Gray had a feeling that he did not know where to start. It would be best if he could get a recommendation. This Blood Beasts and the Environment is not bad. This Blood Beast Encyclopedia is also not bad. Gray took the 2 books that Polly handed over. The first one he flipped through was Blood Beasts and the Environment. This was a book that introduced the living habits of blood beasts. Simply put, it introduced the types of blood beasts that like to stay in which environment. As he flipped through, Gray's eyes grew brighter and brighter. This was a very valuable book. If one knew the type of environment that a blood beast liked to stay in, one could search for that type of blood beast through the corresponding environment. Obviously, this method would make it easier to find the type of blood beast one was looking for. For example, Gray found that the wind wolf blood beast's favorite environment was grassland. If one were to search for grassland, although it was not absolute, there was no doubt that the possibility of encountering a blood beast was higher. While Gray was flipping through the books, Polly also found a book to read. The 2 of them read their own books, and before they knew it, it was already evening. The servant who came to inform them that dinner was ready woke them up from their books. "How is it? Have you finished reading?" Polly looked at Gray and smiled. "Not yet. I just reached this part of the first book." Gray waved the book in his hand. He had just finished reading a small part of it. "It's getting late. Let's go eat first. I'll lend you these 2 books. You can read them on the way." Polly thought for a moment. She knew a little about the Sidney family's attack on the Shadow Serpent. "Thank you." Gray took a feather bookmark and placed it on the last page of the book. He closed the book, took the 2 books, and left the library with Polly. They went to a small dining room near the library. Under the gentle rune light, 2 sets of dinner were placed on the table in the small dining room. The dinner was steak. The meat used was the best part of the Sidney family's aurochs. Ask the kitchen to make 2 more sets and send them over. As soon as the 2 of them sat down, Polly had already ordered the servant beside her. After staying with the Fergus family for half a month, she naturally knew about Gray's appetite. "Yes, Mississippi," the servant stood up. "The Sidney family's main dining room." "Where's Polly?" Marquis Sidney looked at the servant beside him and asked curiously. "Miss is eating in the small dining room near the library." The servant replied respectfully. "Small dining room?" Marquis Sidney raised an eyebrow. Because he and Zeroyan were both busy, the Sidney family usually did not have lunch together. Instead, they would eat in the small dining room nearby. But in the evening, they would usually have dinner together. This was a Sidney family tradition. "Father, let her be. I saw her go to the library with Gray Fergus." Zeroyan smiled mysteriously. "Polly is eating with Gray and Fergus?" Marquise Jatina, who was wearing a woolen sweater and had her black hair tied up, looked graceful and luxurious. Her eyes widened in surprise. She had heard of Gray Fergus. He was a genius child whose reputation spread far and wide. He was not even 20 years old and was already a ferocious warrior. His talent was comparable to Zeroyan's. "It should be," Zero said with a faint smile on his face. "Then let's eat," Marquis Sidney said. He had taken note of Gray, who had displayed talent not inferior to Zero's. If it was Gray, it was not as if he would not consider it. Chapter 245. Before Gray and Viscount Fergus arrived, and after Gray and Viscount Fergus arrived, people from various families arrived one after another. By the evening of the same day, Everyone had arrived. The next day, a meeting was being held in the Sidney family's conference room. More than 30 people, including Gray and Viscount Fergus, were sitting in the room. Even the weakest of them was a ferocious blood warrior. Some of them were from Earl families and their subordinate families, some were from Viscount families, and some were from powerful Baron families. Marquis Sidney sat in the main seat, while Zero sat in the first seat on his left, and an old man with sparse hair sat on his right. He was the ferocious blood warrior who had appeared in the process of clearing out the blood fiends in the Night Forest. His name was Darren Sidney, and he was Marquis Sidney's uncle. Since last year, the Sidney territory has been attacked by the Shadow Serpent many times. The Shadow Serpent is a sword that hangs over the Sidney territory. This time, I've gathered all of you here to destroy it in one fell swoop and get rid of this hidden danger once and for all. Marquis Sidney's gaze swept over everyone as he spoke in a deep voice. The Marquis is right. We can't let the Shadow Serpent continue to run rampant. Earl Ford added, from last year to this year, within 2 years, 2 Viscount families and many Baron families have been annihilated by the assassination of the Shadow Serpent. When the Shadow Serpent recovers, we may become the target of the Shadow Serpent in the future. We must completely destroy it before it recovers. Indeed, now is a good time to destroy the Hand of Shadows. If the Shadow Serpent is not destroyed, none of us here will have peace. I agree to get rid of it. People from various families spoke one after another. Getting rid of the Shadow Serpent was not only an order from the Sidney family, but also related to the safety of their lives and property. Naturally, they all agreed. Of course, even if they did not agree, they had to express their agreement at this time. After all, Marquis Sidney had spoken, and this matter was almost a foregone conclusion. Since he couldn't change the fact that he was going to attack the Shadow Snake regardless of whether he supported or opposed it, he naturally chose to leave a good impression in front of Marquis Sidney. I also agree that we should take action against the Shadow Hand. As the Marquis said, the Shadow Snake is a sword hanging over our heads. If we don't get rid of it, it will fall on our heads sooner or later. Count Smalley coughed lightly and expressed his stance. This time, I have brought all the ferocious blood warriors and above from my family and affiliated families. Everything will be under the Marquis command. Very good, you're very considerate. Sidney nodded in satisfaction at Count Smalley's full support. This is what I should do, Count Smalley humbly replied. Then, he suddenly turned his gaze to Viscount Fergus with a playful look. The 2 berserk blood fiends that I saw at Fergus Castle last time were really powerful. If they can become part of the battle force to encircle and annihilate the Shadow Snake, they will certainly play a huge role. I wonder if Viscount Fergus has brought them? He arrived before Gray and Viscount Fergus. From the castle servants he was familiar with, he had already heard that the Fergus family didn't have any berserk blood fiends following them. As for the 3 carts, they were transported to the Sidney family's warehouse. He thought that the Fergus family was transporting medicinal materials to the Sidney family. Combined with his previous stance, the meaning of his words was self-evident. My Smalley family, in response to Marquis Sidney's call to annihilate the Shadow Snake, is doing our best. But your Fergus family is hiding something. Between the 2 families, it was clear who was the one who truly responded to Marquis Sidney's call. Following his words, the gazes of the other families turned to Viscount Fergus and Gray. Among the gazes, some were curious, some were observing, some weren't optimistic, and some were taking pleasure in their misfortune. There were all kinds of expressions. They had long heard that the Smalley family and the Fergus family didn't get along. Now, it seemed that it was true. The meeting had just begun, and the Fergus family had already dug such a big hole. If this matter wasn't handled well, it was inevitable that it would leave a bad impression on Marquis Sidney. Of course we did. Since Lord Marquis Sidney has decided to take action against the Shadow Snake, the Fergus family naturally fully supports him and has brought all the blood fiends. Viscount Fergus's expression didn't change in the face of Count Smalley's ridicule and the gazes of the other families. Then, he looked sharply at Count Smalley. The last time Count Smalley came to pay a visit, he left in far too much of a hurry. I originally wanted to ask Count Smalley to assess the strength of these blood fiends for our Fergus family, but regrettably, I was unable to do so. This time, I would like to ask Count Smalley to evaluate the battle strength of these blood fiends for my Fergus family. This way, we will have a good idea before the big battle. Hearing Viscount Fergus's words, Count Smalley's expression sank slightly. According to the information he had gathered, the other party indeed didn't have any blood fiends following them. But since the other party dared to say this, it was obvious that they had indeed brought the blood fiends. And the other party's last words could be said to have turned the tables on him. Since you did your best to respond to Marquis Sidney's call, then you might as well do your best to help evaluate the battle strength of these blood fiends. This will allow us to have a clearer understanding of our side's battle strength and make targeted arrangements. Since it's to better deal with the Shadow Snake, I'm naturally happy to help. Count Smalley gnashed his teeth in hatred, but his expression was calm as he spoke. At a time like this, it was obvious that he couldn't back down. Otherwise, the good image he had previously created would crumble. The discussion continued, going into detail about how to proceed, where to rendezvous, and how to launch a surprise attack on the Shadow Snake. More than an hour later, the discussion ended, but everyone knew that the show had just begun. Many people headed directly to the Sidney family's largest training ground, including Marquis Sidney, Saroyan, and Darren Sidney. The reason why they didn't stop the confrontation between the Fergus family and the Smalley family was because they also wanted to evaluate the battle strength of the four blood fiends. After all, the four blood fiends could be said to be an extremely important force in this battle. Naturally, the more they understood, the better, since they could use the battle between Count Smalley and the four blood fiends to probe the battle strength of the four blood fiends. There was naturally no reason to stop it. The huge training ground was filled with white snow and was as big as a football field. It was usually used as a training ground for the castle soldiers, but now it had been vacated. Count Smalley was already standing in the center of the training ground, and the members of the various families who were participating in the meeting were all standing at the edge of the training ground. Not only them, but the Sidney family's Marquis Jettina, Polly, and the second son of the Marquis, Marnell Sidney, had all rushed over. "Big brother, what exactly happened?" Polly asked Saroyan, who was beside her. She had rushed over after hearing that something had happened, but she didn't know the specifics. Count Smalley wants to battle the blood fiends of the Fergus family. Viscount Fergus hopes that Count Smalley can evaluate the battle strength of these blood fiends for the Fergus family, and Count Smalley agreed. Saroyan said playfully, "So it's like that." A strange smile appeared on Polly's face, as though she had heard something very interesting. "What's the matter? Is there a problem?" Marquis Jatina asked curiously when she saw her daughter's strange expression. "Mother, you'll know in a moment." Polly kept her daughter in suspense and said with a smile. She was already looking forward to seeing Count Smalley's expression when he found out that his opponent was a total of four blood fiends. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps could be heard from an alley in the training ground, and everyone couldn't help but look over. The first thing that appeared was a pair of huge bull horns, followed by a huge green body that was as wide as a thick wall, and four legs that were as thick as water buckets. Finally, the silhouette of this huge beast appeared. It was a huge ox-shaped blood fiend with a body length of 4 meters. After the ox-shaped blood fiend, a slender and vigorous blood fiend with a body length of 3 meters appeared. A berserk blood fiend, Windrider Leopard. Viscount Richens cried out when he saw this blood fiend. The blood technique he practiced was the blood technique of the Windrider Leopard, so he was naturally no stranger to the berserk blood fiend of the Windrider Leopard sequence. Thus, he recognized this blood fiend at a glance. Thump, thump, thump. There seems to be another blood fiend after the Windrider Leopard. Didn't the Fergus family only have 2 berserk blood fiends? What's going on here? I heard that the Fergus family also has a Hanhu. Could it be that they brought that Hanhu here as well? No, Hanhu's body is only slightly more than 2 meters long. How could it cause such a commotion? After the Windrider Leopard, the heavy footsteps could still be heard. The members of the various families couldn't help but reveal a suspicious expression. The expression on Count Smalley's face couldn't help but stiffen. He suddenly had a bad premonition. In the next moment, his bad premonition was confirmed. A huge blood fiend's head with bronze skin and two curved blades on its head, one long and one short, appeared. Just by looking at its head, one could tell that this blood fiend's body was huge. Everyone even felt that this blood fiend's body might be even bigger than the ox-shaped blood fiend from before. And their guesses were quickly confirmed. Finally, a huge blood fiend with a body length of 5 meters appeared in front of them. Bronze-armored rhinoceros. This is a berserk blood fiend, the bronze-armored rhinoceros. I heard that this type of blood fiend has very strong defense. Among the berserk blood fiends, very few can injure it. Someone's expression was solemn. The Fergus family actually has a third berserk blood fiend. Someone was shocked. To actually be able to fight against 3 berserk blood fiends alone, Count Smalley could be considered a pioneer. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. Count Ford smiled faintly as he looked at Count Smalley in the middle of the training field. His eyes were filled with mockery. 3 berserk blood fiends. Count Smalley is too arrogant. Among the aristocratic families, there was naturally no lack of families that were close to the Ford family and didn't get along with the Smalley family. Their gazes towards Count Smalley were instantly filled with mockery. However, at this moment, someone shouted with a shocked expression, "No, there are more blood fiends behind. Judging from the commotion, their bodies might not be small." Chapter 246. Damn it. What the hell is going on? How can the Fergus family afford to have a third mad-level blood fiend, or even a fourth? When the third mad-level blood fiend appeared, Count Smalley's face had already turned gloomy. Naturally, he could sense the playful gazes from Count Ford and the other families. But at this moment, he couldn't care less about their gazes. His gaze was fixed on the corner of the training field. He wasn't the only one. Apart from the Sidney family, already knew about it. Everyone else was staring at the same spot. They waited curiously. Thump, thump, thump. Following the sound of heavy footsteps, another huge head appeared. It was a huge, triangular head that was covered in green scales. Its mouth was slightly open, revealing 2 rows of white teeth that were as sharp as daggers. There was no need to doubt. Just by looking at this huge head, one could almost be sure that this was a mad-level blood fiend. And that was indeed the case. Finally, a huge blood fiend that was more than 5 meters long, including its tail, appeared. Its 4 legs were as thick as buckets, and its body was thick and sturdy. This was definitely a mad-level blood fiend. 4 mad-level blood fiends. The Fergus family actually has 4 mad-level blood fiends. This is simply unbelievable. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I'm afraid I would have thought it was just a rumor. After confirming that the 4th mad-level blood fiend was no longer followed by the huge footsteps, some of the noble families heaved a sigh of relief and exclaimed in surprise. Many families looked at Count Smalley and couldn't help but shake their heads. Without a doubt, Count Smalley had kicked an iron plate this time, and it was a very hard iron plate. According to their estimates, Count Smalley might be able to fight 2 mad-level blood fiends with the help of various magic weapons. But as for 4, it was absolutely impossible. How can the Fergus family have 4 mad-level blood fiends? Viscount Lycan's pupils violently contracted, his eyes filled with shock. Like Count Smalley, his relationship with the Fergus family wasn't any better. Suddenly seeing that the Fergus family actually had 4 mad-level blood fiends, his heart turned cold. Such strength was not something that the Richens family could contend against. He secretly decided that he would stay far away from the Fergus family and never provoke the Fergus family again. Dong, dong, dong. Gray brought the 4 berserk grade blood fiends to Count Smalley. Count Smalley's expression was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. Count Smalley, thank you for your trouble. Then, he retreated and ordered the 4 blood fiends to attack. Dong, dong, dong. The first to charge at Count Smalley was the bronze-armored rhinoceros. His 5-meter-long body crashed towards Count Smalley like a small mountain. Oomph. Count Smalley snorted and took out his weapon. It was a pair of earth-yellow metal gloves. Facing the copper-armored lizard that was charging at him like a small mountain, he spread his legs slightly apart and then suddenly threw a punch at the copper-armored rhino's head. Rumble! With a loud sound, The snow under Count Smalley's feet splashed, and the stone slab shattered. His feet sank slightly. However, he didn't move at all. Instead, the copper-armored rhinoceros that was charging at him like a small mountain was pushed back a few steps by the huge impact. The bronze-colored skin on his head was slightly broken. In a contest of strength, the other party actually won against the copper-armored rhinoceros, which was known for its great strength. One could only imagine how strong the other party was. As expected, the blood technique he cultivates is not ordinary. Gray, who was commanding the blood fiends from afar, thought to himself that this was indeed the case. As a Count's family, although the Smalley family didn't have the ability to obtain a special blood technique, the one they cultivated would definitely not be too bad. Now, it seemed that this was indeed the case. The blood technique that the other party cultivated was extremely strong in terms of strength. Even if it wasn't at the peak of the same level, it shouldn't be too far off. If the bronze armor rhinoceros were to fight him one-on-one, it would definitely be at a disadvantage even if it couldn't be killed. However, the other party wasn't just facing the bronze-armored rhinoceros. Whoosh! A yellow figure with purple spots on his body moved extremely quickly, like a bolt of lightning. He quickly appeared beside Count Smalley and viciously swiped down with his sharp claws. Count Smalley, who had just forced the bronze-armored rhinoceros to retreat, had no time to defend himself. At this moment, buzz! A strange sound rang out. With Count Smalley as the center, the ground within a 20-meter radius sank slightly. The snow was compacted, and cracks began to appear on the stone slabs that paved the ground. The Windrider leopard, which was originally rapidly approaching the other party, suddenly slowed down. Compared to its previous swift speed, it was like a completely different type of blood fiend. Gravity field and an excessively strong strength. Could the other party have cultivated the blood technique of the grizzly bear sequence? Gray faintly felt that the blood technique that the other party cultivated should be the grizzly bear sequence's blood technique. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility of other similar blood techniques. Looking at the Windrider leopard that suddenly slowed down, a cold look flashed across Count Smalley's face. He had been careless the last time and suffered at the hands of this leopard. Thinking of this, a cold look flashed across his eyes. He suddenly punched the Windrider leopard's head. Whoosh! However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a strong wind coming towards him. A bone-piercing sense of danger made his hair stand on end. He tilted his head slightly and saw a thick, long green tail that was like a huge green whip lashing towards him. He only had time to block with his fist before he was hit by the huge whip. Boom! A huge force was transmitted into his body through the boxing gloves. Although it was slightly weaker than his own strength, he could only block with his fists in front of his body. He simply didn't have enough time to push it out. Boom! His body flew out like a cannonball. Under the continuous attacks of the blood fiends, he was ultimately at a disadvantage. Having cultivated the grizzly bear blood technique, his strength was indeed quite strong. He was almost as strong as those who cultivated the special blood technique. However, from the beginning to the end, he was not facing 1 or 2 mad-level blood fiends. Instead, he was facing 4 mad-level blood fiends. Bang! He flew out more than 10 meters before crashing to the ground in a sorry state. Snow splattered everywhere, and the stone slabs that were smashed directly shattered. One could imagine the strength of the force that sent him flying. However, having cultivated the grizzly bear blood technique, his body wasn't weak, and he quickly recovered. However, at this moment, a huge ox hoof that was as thick as a water bucket came trampling down on him. His expression changed drastically, and he immediately rolled on the ground to avoid it. Boom! Snow splattered everywhere, and the stone slabs on the ground shattered. Even the surrounding stone slabs were lifted up, and a huge pit appeared on the ground. The flying stones slapped his face, causing him a wave of pain. Moreover, there was a lot of snow on his face, making him look extremely miserable. His expression was extremely gloomy. He angrily turned around and wanted to get up. At this moment, he suddenly felt a pair of sharp teeth stuck in his throat. If he dared to act rashly, he was afraid that the teeth would bite his neck off immediately. The owner of the teeth had purple spots on its body. It was the Windrider leopard whose speed had been restricted by gravity. When he was sent flying, the gravity field was naturally interrupted and dispelled. He didn't expect that before he could get up and use the gravity field again, the other party's sharp teeth were stuck in his throat. "Thank you, Count Smalley, for testing the Fergus family." Gray smiled and called back the four blood fiends. He didn't use too much strength. The encirclement of the shadow serpent was imminent. At this time, Marquis Sidney obviously didn't want to have his combat strength damaged. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind letting the other party lie in bed for half a month. Count Smalley got up from the ground and wiped the snow off his face with his hand. His expression was extremely gloomy. He didn't say anything harsh, but turned around and walked out of the gymnasium. He had schemed against the Fergus family and ended up being schemed against. It was already very embarrassing. If he were to be ruthless now, it would be even more embarrassing. "My lord." The four members of the Smalley family and the affiliated families quickly followed. The members of the other families, including Count Ford, looked at the other party's embarrassed figure with ridicule in their eyes. Count Smalley asked for it. He dug a hole for the Fergus family, but he didn't expect to fall into the hole himself. At the same time, they couldn't help but be slightly surprised. The Fergus family had hidden too deeply. They actually had 4 berserker blood fiends. The families all dispersed. Marquis Sidney, Saroyan, and Marnell Sidney returned to the study. "What do you think?" Marquis Sidney looked at Saroyan and asked. "They're stronger than I thought." Saroyan thought for a moment and replied. "The control blood fiends' corpses have the weakness of not being able to use their blood fiends' abilities. In order to make up for this weakness, the Fergus family chose to control blood fiends with strong bodies. The 4 blood fiends together are comparable to 3 ordinary berserkers. There shouldn't be a problem. Indeed, they are comparable to 3 ordinary berserkers." Marnell Sidney continued. "With these 4 berserker blood fiends, I have a lot more confidence in encircling and suppressing the shadow serpent this time." He was still the leader of the encirclement and suppression of the shadow serpent this time. Neither Marquis Sidney nor the copperback dragon would go. Marquis Sidney needed to stay in the Sidney territory to deal with unexpected situations. He couldn't leave at will. A huge blood fiend like the copperback dragon could cause a huge commotion wherever it went. It was unrealistic to use it to sneak attack the shadow serpent. Most likely, before they even reached the shadow snake's lair, the shadow snake would have already received the news and fled. "That's good." Marquis Sidney nodded. Although on the surface, their strength should be much stronger than that of a shadow serpent. However, the shadow serpent was, after all, a powerful organization. It was inevitable that they would have some hidden means. Naturally, the stronger the combat power sent this time, the better. Chapter 247. The next day, the team, which was divided into several small teams, set off one after another toward the location of the shadow serpent. It was a place that did not belong to any family and was directly under the jurisdiction of the Purple Moon Kingdom. Gray and Viscount Fergus were assigned to the Sidney family's team. Due to the presence of the 4 blood fiends, they disguised themselves as a caravan. As the carriage moved forward, Gray held a book in his hand and read it with great interest. This was one of the 2 books that Polly had lent him. "I heard from Polly that you like books about blood fiends." Sitting beside him was Zaloyan. Zaloyan glanced at the book in Gray's hand and smiled. "I do like these books." Gray explained. "The more I know about blood fiends, the less likely I will be at a disadvantage when I encounter one in the future." "That's true." Zaloyan nodded in agreement. "The Sidney family has many books about blood fiends. When the time comes, you can visit the Sidney family more often." "Thank you, young Master Zaloyan." Gray thanked him courteously. Snake Village, a village in the Purple Moon Kingdom that did not exist on the map. Only the people in the village called it that. From the outside, it looked like an extremely ordinary village. The walls were surrounded by wooden fences, and there were low-tiled houses. If one were to enter the village and observe carefully, they would discover that this village was not ordinary. The small village had no less than a dozen hidden sentries. At the same time, there was a training ground paved with stone slabs in the village. In the training ground, there were many people with auras that were much stronger than ordinary people. They were either cultivating blood techniques or tempering their combat skills. Dummies made of straw were stabbed in the heart and beheaded. Their attacks were cold, merciless, and ruthless. This was the lair of the Shadow Serpent, an assassin training base disguised as a village. A week later, more than 30 people appeared on the outskirts of the village, sizing up the village from afar. They were Gray's team that was besieging the Shadow Serpent. Gray, let's make a move first. When we hear the sounds of fighting, you lead the 4 mad-level blood fiends and enter from the south. Due to the huge commotion caused by the blood fiends, after some discussion, it was decided that the majority of the troops would attack first. Gray, who was leading the blood fiends, would attack later. Before the Shadow Serpent could react, they had to kill as many members of the Shadow Serpent as possible. Once the commotion was detected, Gray ordered the 4 blood fiends to attack. I understand. Gray nodded. Then, except for Gray, more than 30 people spread out. A team of more than 10 people lurked towards the village from the east, north, and west. The 3 teams were led by Marnell Sidney, Count Smalley, and Count Ford respectively. Poof, poof, poof. Even the weakest leader was a berserker. The ordinary members of the Shadow Serpent were naturally killed before they could even react. The 3 parties went deep into the village. Soon, dozens of Shadow Serpent members fell under their weapons. Finally, their whereabouts were discovered by a well-hidden sentry. Gee, the sharp sound of a whistle spread throughout the village. Although the leader, Count Ford, immediately killed the sentry, he still couldn't stop the sound from spreading. Not good. Enemy. The members of the Shadow Serpent who were training in the village all had a slight change in expression. They all rushed towards the direction of the sound. In a building in the middle of the village, the residence of the 3 leaders of the Shadow Serpent. The profits of the organization have dropped a lot in the past few months. The purple-haired man frowned. The last time we attacked the Fergus family, we lost too many people. Now, the organization only has about 10 people at the level of the Berserker. This has seriously affected the number of missions completed. The short-haired man sighed. The Fergus family. Hearing the name of this family, the gloomy old man couldn't help but clench his fists. His eyes were full of cold, murderous intent. They already knew that the Fergus family had Berserker blood fiends. Naturally, they also understood why they had been defeated by the Fergus family twice in a row. It could be said that the losses they had suffered at the hands of this family weren't any less than the losses they had suffered at the hands of the Sidney family. Just the combat strength of the ferocious warriors alone had already reached a total of 10. What made him even more furious was that even a captain-level character of the Dark Serpent had lost a berserk warrior. The organization is now unable to make ends meet. If this continues, I'm afraid. The purple-haired man looked worried. The Shadow Serpent was such a large organization. The consumption of various training resources was naturally huge. Now that the profits from the assassination missions had sharply decreased, the profits were no longer enough to sustain the consumption. They were already using the savings they had accumulated over the years. If this continues, I'm afraid we can only consider the Wallen family's proposal to merge the Shadow Serpent into the Wallen family. The short-haired man frowned. Merge the Shadow Serpent into the Wallen family? The gloomy-looking old man's expression was uncertain. As the person in charge of an assassin organization, he was free and unfettered. He was really unwilling to merge the organization into a family and become a vassal and tool of this family. But from the current situation, if the Shadow Serpent continued like this, it would fall apart in a few years. This was something he would not allow. Screech! At this moment, a sharp whistle was heard. The 3 men's expressions changed. They quickly rushed out of the house and rushed in the direction of the sound. At the same time, on the Sidney family's side, the other 2 teams that had invaded the village hurriedly rushed in the direction of the sound. There was no doubt that the enemy had rushed there. Irwy Ford, how could it be? How did the people of the Sidney territory find this place? The 3 men rushed over and immediately saw Count Ford confronting the members of the Shadow Serpent. Among them, the purple-haired man and the short-haired man had seen and fought with Count Ford before. They recognized him at a glance, and their expressions changed greatly. Good. Good Sydney family that actually found this place. The gloomy-looking old man's eyes were full of coldness. Because of the Sydney family, the shadow serpent had been declining day by day. They did not expect the Sydney family to dare to come to their door. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this moment, there were movements from both sides. Then, more than 10 people rushed over from both sides. It was the team led by Marnell Sydney and Count Smalley. Duke Smalley. Seeing the leader on the left, the short-haired man called out his name. Seeing the leader on the right, the gloomy-looking old man immediately gritted his teeth. Marnell Sydney. As a member of the older generation of a shadow serpent, he had experienced the battle between the shadow serpent and the Sydney family more than 20 years ago. Naturally, he recognized the older generation of the Sydney family. Rob Tracy, you really are not dead. Marnell Sydney naturally recognized the gloomy-looking old man and immediately said coldly, "If your Sydney family is not destroyed, how can I die in peace?" The gloomy-looking old man, Rob Tracy, snorted coldly. "Don't worry, I'll send you to see your seniors of the Shadow Serpent today," Marnell Sydney said with a cold face. "Do it." Following his words, more than 30 people, including Count Ford and Count Smalley, rushed toward the members of the Shadow Serpent. Although there were no less than 100 assassins of the Shadow Serpent gathered here, they were not afraid at all, because each of them was a ferocious blood warrior, and these members of the Shadow Serpent, from their previous observation, were far less powerful than them. Clang, clang, clang. The people on both sides were on the verge of exploding, and they immediately engaged in a bloody battle. Puff, puff, puff. Flowers of blood bloomed along with the snowflakes. On the side of the Shadow Serpent, there were often several people surrounding one person. However, facing the Sydney family's alliance, whose weakest members were ferocious blood warriors, there were still people who were killed from time to time. On the side of the Sydney family's alliance, there were also people who were injured from time to time. After all, there would always be times when one person could not cope with several people. Swoosh, swoosh. The old man with thinning hair, Marnell Sydney, and the old man with a cold expression, Rob Tracy, also quickly engaged in a battle. Marnell Sydney held a long sword in his hand, and the long sword emitted a blue light. Rob Tracy held a short knife in his hand, and the short knife emitted an earthy yellow light. The two men quickly approached each other. Clang! The two men's weapons collided, and after a burst of sparks, they quickly separated. However, Rob Tracy quickly retreated. Obviously, he had suffered a small loss in the battle just now. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. However, as he retreated, he suddenly growled. From the shadows of the house, huge black shadow tentacles suddenly emerged, covering a range of dozens of meters, and attacked Marnell Sydney. Humph! Facing the overwhelming shadow tentacles, Marnell Sydney stabbed his long sword into the ground and snorted coldly. Then, a large amount of powder from the surrounding ground floated up and turned into sharp blades, meeting the incoming shadow tentacles. Puff, puff, puff. Under the impact of the metal blades, the shadow tentacles quickly collapsed and disappeared, but under the continuous infusion of Rob Tracy's blood power, they grew again. The metal blades that had been shattered by the impact quickly floated up and attacked the shadow tentacles again. Swish, swish, swish. The terrifying battle suddenly affected the surrounding 100 meters, and the surrounding houses were riddled with holes. The two sides of the battle dodged one after another. Some who could not dodge in time were directly injured by the aftermath of the battle, and some were even killed. There's fighting. Not far from the village, the sound of fighting suddenly came from the village. Gray immediately led the 4 berserk blood fiends into the village from the south. Boom! The wooden fence was directly smashed into pieces. The 4 blood fiends frantically crashed into the village, and even crashed in from one side of the house and out from the other. They quickly rushed in the direction of the battle. Chapter 248. What's approaching? Oh no, that's... The huge commotion immediately alarmed the members of the Dark Serpent. They all looked in the direction of the commotion. Then, their expressions changed drastically, accompanied by a rumbling sound, for blood fiends rushed over violently. The largest one was more than 5 meters long, and even the smallest one was 3 meters long. Mad blood fiends, for mad blood fiends. The purple-haired man, who was fighting with Earl Ford, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. How could this be? The short-haired man, who was fighting with Earl Smalley, also had an extremely ugly expression on his face. It was already extremely difficult for them to resist. Who would have thought that the Sidney family would have 4 more mad blood fiends? How could they resist this? Thump, thump, thump. While the members of the Dark Serpent were still in shock, Gray led the 4 mad blood fiends to the battlefield. The 4 mad blood fiends, and their huge size, frightened many of the members of the Dark Serpent. Some of them were even killed by the Sidney family's allied forces due to their nervousness. Don't panic, stay calm. Yes, don't panic. With Lord Luobu here, we still have a chance of winning. The purple-haired man and the short-haired man berated loudly, but the effect was minimal. Not to mention these people, even the 2 of them could not help but feel slightly desperate. 4 mad blood fiends meant 4 mad blood warriors. The other party had 4 more mad blood warriors. How could they fight this battle? Boom, boom, boom. Mantle Sidney and Rob Tracy's blood fiends were constantly attacking each other. However, Mantle Sidney obviously cultivated a special blood technique that was more powerful. The cold-looking old man was gradually at a disadvantage. Swish, swish, swish. The black shadow was blasted into pieces. Before it could regenerate, dozens of metal blades broke through the shadow's blockade and attacked Rob Tracy. Rob Tracy's expression changed as he quickly retreated. The place where he originally stood was pierced by a large number of sharp blades, leaving densely packed holes. Rob Tracy, today is the day you die. Mantle Sidney said coldly when he saw Gray rushing over with the 4 blood fiends. With his strength and 4 berserk grade blood fiends, Rob Tracy had absolutely no chance of escaping today. The assassination organization that had been entangled with the Sidney family for more than 20 years was finally going to be destroyed by the Sidney family. Ha ha ha. So this is the trump card your Sidney family has prepared to deal with my Shadow Serpent? But at this moment, Rob Tracy, who was forced to retreat and was clearly at a disadvantage, suddenly revealed a strange sneer on his face. How disappointing. His face was full of contempt. Today, all of you will stay here. After he finished speaking, a simple bracelet under his sleeve was infused with the power of blood. Immediately, it lit up and emitted a black light. The moment the bracelet emitted a black light, bang! In the center of the village, in the residence of the leader of the Shadow Serpent, the wall of a room was suddenly knocked open. The wall that was knocked open revealed a huge head. It was a huge bull's head. On its huge head, there were 2 sharp horns that were like 2 huge machetes. Patter! After the head, the huge body crashed out. The wall collapsed with a loud bang, and the huge figure was finally revealed. Thump, thump, thump! It rampaged and rushed over at high speed. Under its impact, the houses collapsed one by one. The commotion caused was even greater than that caused by Gray's 4 berserk gray blood fiends. Finally, everyone saw its figure clearly. It was a huge, greenish-black, bull-type blood fiend with a body length of 7 meters. What a huge blood fiend. This what's going on. A berserk gray blood fiend. The Shadow Serpent actually has a berserk gray blood fiend? The Sidney Alliance was shocked. Earl Ford and Earl Smalley's faces were gloomy. Both of them had not expected the situation to take such a huge turn in the blink of an eye. How could there be such a huge blood fiend in the village? Where did this blood fiend come from? The members of the Shadow Serpent were also shocked because they had not known that there was such a huge blood fiend in the village. Even the purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man were suspicious because even they did not know about this blood fiend. Otherwise, they would not have wavered just now. A berserk gray blood fiend, a bull. Mantle Sidney's face darkened when he saw this blood fiend. Although he had overestimated the combat power of the Shadow Serpent and asked the Fergus family to bring 4 berserk gray blood fiends, he did not expect the Shadow Serpent to have such a trump card. In terms of combat power, Gray's 4 berserk gray blood fiends were definitely not as strong as this berserk gray blood fiend in front of him. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Today, you and the people you brought stay here. Rob Tracy sneered as he looked at Marnell Sidney's ugly expression. Today was destined to be a painful lesson for the Sidney family. The shadow serpent actually has a berserk grade blood fiend? Gray's pupils shrank as he looked at the berserk grade blood fiend that had suddenly appeared. Its body was greenish-black, and its body was 7 meters long. Its 4 thick legs were like 4 thick pillars. When it stepped on the ground immediately caved in. However, in the next moment, his face revealed a look of astonishment. Dead, this bull is dead. There was a wound on the bull's chest that was not too obvious. The skin and flesh around the wound were turned outwards, and there were no signs of scabbing, revealing pale flesh. Of course, the reason for his judgment was not only because of the wound on the bull's chest, but also because his infrared perception did not detect any infrared radiation from the bull's body. Dead. Hearing Gray's exclamation, many people in the Sidney army looked at Gray in surprise. They did not know the basis of Gray's judgment. Gray, are you sure? Marnell Sidney also looked at Gray and asked. I'm sure. Gray nodded affirmatively. The wound on the bull's chest that shows no signs of healing is the best proof. This bull is either being controlled by someone with the bloodline of the corpse ape or by a magical weapon with similar abilities. A controlled corpse? Marnell Sidney squinted his eyes. Wasn't this the case for the 4 berserk grade blood fiends of the Fergus family? Since it was said by Gray Fergus, who was more knowledgeable, it should be highly credible. Good eyesight. When I first obtained this corpse, I was careful enough to only leave a fatal wound. I didn't expect you to see through it. Seeing that Gray had exposed the bull's secret, Rob Tracy looked at Gray. In order to kill this bull, he had directly used a strong anesthetic that he had bought from an alchemy master at a high price. He mixed it with a plant that the bull liked to eat the most and lured it to swallow it. After the bull swallowed it, it was completely anesthetized and lost consciousness. That was how he was able to kill the bull with a single wound. He did not expect that, even so, the young man in front of him could still see through it. However, so what if you can see that it's the corpse of a berserk grade blood fiend? Although the one I chose is not a talented one, its physical strength is extremely strong. Even if it's dead, its combat power is not inferior to an ordinary berserk grade blood fiend. It also has a strong defense. He sneered and was still full of confidence. His gaze returned to Marnell Sidney as he said coldly, Well, it's time to send you on your way. As soon as he finished speaking, the bull pounced on Marnell Sidney. Its violent strength caused the ground to tremble violently, leaving cracks one after another. Swish, swish, swish. Marnell Sidney's face was solemn. A large amount of metal powder condensed into a large number of metal blades and collided with the bull that was charging violently. Boom, boom, boom. But at this moment, countless black shadow tentacles appeared and intercepted the metal blades. Although the tentacles were shattered under the impact of the metal blades, most of the metal blades were blocked. Clang, clang, clang. Faced with the few remaining metal blades, the barbarian bull directly dashed towards them. All the metal blades that collided with it were shattered, but there were only a few minor injuries on its body. Soon, it rushed in front of Marnell Sidney, lowered its head slightly, and the 2 curved horns on its head slashed at Marnell Sidney like a machete. Marnell Sidney hurriedly pulled out his sword and swept it out. Boom! The sword and the curved horns collided violently, and then a huge force was transmitted from his sword. He could not help but be shaken by the huge force, and with every step he took, a crack appeared on the ground. With the place where the fight took place as the center, the air was violently vented. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this moment, countless shadow tentacles suddenly appeared and twisted into a huge spike, stabbing at Marnell Sidney, who had nowhere to hide. Obviously, Rob Tracy had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Clang! Marnell Sidney growled, and the color of his skin suddenly changed, as if it was smeared with a layer of gold powder, like golden metal. The huge spike hit his body, and there was a sound of metal colliding. Bang! Marnell Sidney smashed into the ground in the distance, and a huge hole appeared in the chest of his clothes. Golden skin appeared where the hole was, but surprisingly, he was not injured. As expected, his skin is rough, and his flesh is tough. Rob Tracy commanded the bull to attack Marnell Sidney, and he also controlled the shadow to help. Having dealt with the Sidney family before, he knew very well how to deal with the Sidney family's defense. That was to exhaust him until his blood energy ran out. With a bull that did not consume the blood power, he was not worried that the blood power would be exhausted before his opponent. Swish! However, at this moment, a yellow figure, revealing black claws, jumped up and quickly slashed at his throat. Not only that, but from behind and on both sides, there were also huge figures rushing at him. In an instant, he was surrounded. Chapter 249. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 4 figures attacked Rob Tracy from 4 different directions. These 4 silhouettes were the 4 blood fiends commanded by Gray. When Marnell Sidney and Rob Tracy were fighting, he didn't immediately command the 4 berserk blood beasts to join the battle. Instead, he was waiting for an opportunity. Finally, he seized the opportunity when Rob Tracy relaxed and formed an encirclement. He did not use the 4 blood fiends to attack the bull, who had a strong defense, because he knew very well that it would be strenuous and fruitless. Given the bull's strong defense, the 4 blood fiends' attacks could only leave some minor injuries on it. It was impossible to kill it in a short time. Therefore, his target from the beginning was Rob Tracy. Humph! Rob Tracy, who was caught off guard and surrounded by the 4 blood fiends, snorted coldly. Suddenly, a large number of shadow tentacles appeared from the shadows under his feet. They were like the tentacles of a giant octopus, attacking in all 4 directions. Bang! The ox-shaped blood fiend on the left side was hit in many places. It was badly mutilated and flew backward quickly. Bang! The jasper lizard on the right side was also hit in many places. Its scales were shattered, revealing badly mutilated wounds. It flew backward quickly. Bang! The bronze-armored rhinoceros at the back was hit and slid away, plowing a clear trail on the ground. It was also hit by several shadow tentacles and was also injured. However, compared to the previous 2 blood fiends, it was undoubtedly much lighter. It only had scratches on its skin. Whoosh! In the front, the Wind Rider leopard relied on its speed to dodge the tentacles that were attacking it. It was the only one among the 4 blood fiends that was not injured. Even so, it was still forced to retreat and distance itself from Rob Tracy. He broke the encirclement of the 4 blood fiends in an instant. Seeing that the encirclement of the 4 blood fiends was broken in an instant, Gray's hair stood on end, and a strong sense of crisis arose in his heart. Although he had already guessed that the 4 blood fiends were not a match for the suspected leader of the Shadow Snakes, he did not expect them to be defeated so easily. Even under the circumstances of a sneak attack, he was still unable to harm the other party at all. After forcing the 4 blood fiends to retreat, Rob Tracy looked contemptuously at Gray, who came with the 4 blood fiends. You're quite good at looking for opportunities. However, in the face of absolute strength, such little tricks are destined to be futile. As he spoke, he saw the 3 injured blood fiends and the Wind Rider leopard crawling back up under Gray's control. When he saw the injuries on the 3 injured blood fiends, his gaze turned sharp. That's not right. He's not bleeding. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Gray with a dangerous gaze. No wonder you were able to discover the abnormality of the barbarian bull. It turns out that the 4 blood fiends are also being manipulated in such a way. This is truly beyond my expectations. A look of interest flashed across his face, but his eyes were extremely cold. I've never heard of the Corpse Ape Echelon's blood magic. That means you also have a magic weapon similar to mine. It really is a magic weapon. Hearing Rob Tracy's own admission, Gray's heart skipped a beat. The other party was indeed holding a magic weapon, and it was not controlled by someone in the dark with the ability to control corpses. I've heard that the Fergus family has 2 blood fiends. Although the numbers don't match, I think you should be a member of the Fergus family. Rob Tracy's expression was as cold as ice. His hatred for the Fergus family was no less than that of the Sidney family. Very good, very good. Not only did the Fergus family send themselves to their deaths, but they also sent me such a special magic weapon? A sinister smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. From below his body, dozens of black tentacles extended and attacked Gray. It was as if they were preparing to crush an ant. Gray's expression changed slightly as he commanded the four blood fiends to meet the tentacles. The bronze-armored rhinoceros madly collided with the tentacles. The jasper lizard lashed out with its thick green tail. The ox-type blood fiend lowered its head and met the tentacles with its horns. The windrider leopard flashed quickly. Its forelimbs revealed sharp claws that were as sharp as blades. Every time it flashed, a black tentacle would be cut off. However, although most of the tentacles were blocked, there were still more than 10 tentacles that broke through the blockade and attacked Gray. Not good. Seeing that Gray was in danger, Marnell Sidney's expression suddenly changed. However, he was now entangled with the barbarian bull and could not get away in a short time. Gray. Viscount Fergus's expression changed greatly. Although he knew that Gray had the strength of a berserker, his opponent was a barbarian blood warrior. Gray. Zero's heart sank completely. Gray was only a berserker blood warrior. How could he block the attack of a barbarian blood warrior? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The shadow tentacles, which were cast by a barbarian blood warrior, were terrifyingly fast. Gray actually felt that there was nowhere to hide. He no longer hesitated and immediately used the frost wind blade. Whoosh! 5 icy green ice wind blades met the dozen or so incoming tentacles. Seeing that Gray was powerless to resist, Rob Tracy's eyes were full of contempt. Although the power had been blocked and weakened by the 4 berserker blood beasts, how could he block it with just 5 wind blades? Puff, puff, puff. Out of the 10 or so tentacles, 5 of them were chopped off by the 5 wind blades, but the rest of the tentacles were still intact as they attacked Gray. Just at this moment, a gust of white, icy cold air suddenly spread out. It quickly covered a large area, covering all the attacking tentacles. Regardless of whether they had been chopped off or were still intact, they were all shrouded in it. Crack! Crack! All the tentacles quickly froze and spread all the way to the roots of the tentacles. The entire tentacle was frozen and could not move at all. What? Seeing more than 10 tentacles suddenly frozen, the contempt on Rob Tracy's face suddenly stiffened. Because of the division of power, the power of his shadow tentacles was not too strong, but to destroy them all was not something an ordinary berserker could do. But these 5 wind blades were able to completely freeze and destroy more than 10 tentacles. One could imagine the power of these 5 wind blades. He blocked it. Marnell Sidney, who was entangled by Barbarian Bull and could not get away, was still paying attention to this side. He was surprised. He can actually use 5 wind blades at the same time. Is he already a berserker? Gray is already a berserker? And his blood beast ability seems to have mutated. It actually has such a terrifying icy power. Zeloyan was stunned. How long had it been since Gray became a ferocious blood warrior? How could he become a berserker so quickly? And because of the mutation of his blood beast ability, it seemed that his combat power was stronger than an ordinary berserker. He blocked it. Viscount Fergus breathed a sigh of relief. Huff! Seeing the cold air erupting from the frigid ice wind blades completely freeze all the tentacles, Gray also let out a sigh of relief. He knew that his frigid ice wind blades were extremely powerful, even more powerful than ordinary special blood beasts. After all, this was a combination of the abilities of a special blood beast and a wind-type blood beast. But the opponent he encountered was even stronger. This was a genuine berserker. The huge gap between their realms made Gray not very confident, even when facing the opponent's attack that had been weakened by the 4 berserker blood beasts. Fortunately, the power of the frigid ice wind blades was able to block more than 10 tentacles. A berserker, and the power of his blood beast ability has obviously reached a special level. Restraining the contempt on his face, Rob Tracy's expression became gloomy. What a Fergus family! Not only does a mere Viscount family have a powerful magic weapon that can control blood fiends, but they also have a berserker whose combat strength has reached a special level. This is truly shocking. Looking at Gray's excessively young face, the murderous intent in his heart boiled. At this moment, his desire to kill Gray was even greater than Marnell Sidney's. Marnell Sidney was like him, probably unable to become a wild blood warrior in this lifetime. But this child of the Fergus family in front of him had become a berserker at such a young age. It was not impossible for him to become a wild blood warrior in the future. Then all the more I can't let you live. The moment his voice fell, Yi Zichen's expression changed. Swish, swish, swish. Hundreds of shadow tentacles once again attacked Gray from the shadows of the ruins of the surrounding houses that had already been destroyed. Ear-piercing whistling sounds could be heard in the air, densely packed from all directions. Hearing the whistling sounds from all directions, Gray's hair stood on end, and cold sweat appeared on his back. He commanded the 4 berserker blood beasts to block the black tentacles in 4 directions, while he himself was on guard against the black tentacles that broke through the blockade. Swish! A black tentacle broke through the blockade of the 4 blood beasts and attacked him. Poof! The magic sword in his hand was entwined with lightning. With a quick sweep of the sword, he cut off the tentacle. The lightning on the sword scorched the entire tentacle, completely destroying it. Swish, swish, swish! As soon as he cut off the tentacle, 3 more shadow tentacles broke through the blockade from another direction and attacked him. With a low roar, he slashed out an icy wind blade and froze the 3 shadow tentacles. Swish, swish, swish! From the left and right, 3 shadow tentacles on one side and 5 shadow tentacles on the other side broke through the blockade and attacked him. He quickly slashed out an icy wind blade to the left and 2 to the right, freezing a total of 8 tentacles. But at this moment, his facial expression changed abruptly. Swish, swish, swish! More tentacles came at him from all directions. The 4 berserker blood beasts that were originally guarding it. The jade lizard and the ox-type blood beasts were damaged in many places, with round wounds appearing one after another. The bronze rhinoceros was sent flying by the numerous tentacles. Although the wind-rider leopard was not injured, it was forced to retreat by the tentacles. The protection of the 4 blood beasts was broken, and he was completely exposed to the numerous shadow tentacles. Chapter 250. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. No less than 100 thick shadow tentacles attacked Gray from all directions. The sharp whistling sound made one's hair stand on end. Just by listening to the sound, one could feel the power of these tentacles. Not good. Gray, who was completely exposed to the shadow tentacles, felt his hair stand on end. His back was soaked in cold sweat. His muscles were tense, and his face was extremely serious. A strong sense of danger pierced his skin until it hurt. He quickly glanced at the approximate location of these shadow tentacles and growled. With him as the center, the surrounding air suddenly became strange. A large amount of icy green light gathered and formed a green tornado. He did not care about the loss of blood energy and used the mutated Gale Wolf blood beast ability to its maximum. Facing such a situation, this was the only way to save himself. The green tornado wreaked havoc, and a bone-chilling cold air filled the air. Fortunately, his body had been modified by the ice attribute and had a strong resistance to this kind of cold. The green tornado spun to its strongest. He made a prompt decision and stomped on the ground. As he stomped down, the ground collapsed, and the surrounding tornadoes quickly turned into icy wind blades, slashing towards the shadow tentacles that were attacking him. There were tentacles in front, behind, left, and right. Puff, 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 puff. A large number of shadow tentacles were cut off, but there were too many of them. Even if dozens of tentacles were cut off, more than half of them were still intact. Ka ka ka, ka ka ka. However, at this moment, a large amount of icy cold air suddenly exploded and spread out. The remaining shadow tentacles were instantly frozen. Looking from Gray's direction, one could see that around Gray, there were hundreds of shadow tentacles around him. They stopped about 10 meters away from Gray, protecting him in the middle. Gray Fergus! In the battle, Count Smalley glanced at Gray from the corner of his eyes. When he saw this scene, his pupils contracted violently. He really did not expect that Gray Fergus had already reached the level of a berserker. And because of the mutation of his bloodline, his combat strength had reached such a high level. He could even block the attack of a berserker. Although he could see that Grey Fergus had definitely stimulated his blood beast ability to be so powerful, it was still very terrifying. However, it was still extremely terrifying. After all, the opponent was a barbarian blood warrior who was one level higher than him. Grey, Viscount Fergus, and Zeloyan were both surprised by Grey's combat strength and worried at the same time. Grey's battle prowess was indeed very strong. He was actually able to block the attack of a barbarian blood warrior. However, this method consumed too much of his blood energy. Grey definitely wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. I hope I can still make it. A look of surprise and determination flashed across Manel's aged face. Barbarian Bull, who was fighting with him, was already covered with wounds. Barbarian Bull's head and neck, which Barbarian Bull focused on, were badly mutilated. Knowing that this bull was being controlled by a magic weapon with the ability to control corpses, he naturally understood where this bull's weakness was. Humph! His attack was blocked again. Rob Tracy's face became gloomier. He immediately prepared to use his shadow ability to attack Grey again. At this moment, whoosh! He suddenly stopped using his shadow ability and dodged to the side. Whoosh! Just as he dodged the attack, a yellow figure flashed by and brushed past his shoulder. The sharp black claws rubbed against his clothes, and a long gash appeared on his clothes. However, there was no blood. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After dodging to the side, he once again moved horizontally 3 times. The copper rhinoceros, the jade lizard, and the bull-type blood fiend appeared from 3 different directions and collided with him. Seeing that the blood fiends could not block the shadow tentacles, Grey decisively ordered the blood fiends to attack Rob Tracy. That was why the scene just now happened. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After dodging the encirclement of the 4 blood fiends, Rob Tracy stomped on the ground. Dozens of shadow tentacles emerged from the shadow beneath him and attacked the 4 blood fiends that were pouncing toward him. The wounds on the jade lizard and the bull-type blood fiend increased, and they were sent flying. The copper rhinoceros had thick skin and flesh. Although it was not injured, it was forced to retreat. The windrider leopard was surrounded by dozens of tentacles. It had nowhere to run and was tied up. Crack! The combined strength of the dozens of tentacles was enormous. The windrider leopard's body, which was not considered strong among the berserk blood fiends, was immediately squeezed out of shape. The sound of bones breaking could be clearly heard. White bones pierced through the windrider leopard's skin and flesh. In the end, when the dozen or so shadow tentacles loosened their grip, a large mass of dough-like flesh fell to the ground and stopped moving. All the bones in its body, including its skull, were shattered. Its connection with Grey was completely severed. The windrider leopard is crippled. Grey's face darkened when he saw the trapped windrider leopard fall to the ground like a piece of dough before he could make a move. After all, he was facing a barbarian blood warrior. He was starting to suffer losses. Among the 4 blood fiends, the windrider leopard's speed was comparable to that of an ordinary barbarian blood fiend. However, its defense was the weakest among the 4 blood fiends. It was also the easiest to cripple. As long as it was caught, it would be easily crippled. As expected, the windrider leopard became the first blood fiend to be crippled. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Although Grey's heart sank, he still quickly slashed out 5 ice wind blades. They carried a terrifying chill as they slashed toward Rob Tracy. He also controlled the other 3 blood fiends to attack Rob Tracy in a frenzy. He was trying his best to restrain Rob Tracy's energy. It was almost impossible to defeat his opponent. Even if the blood fiend he was controlling was a Cercopithecus that was half a step away from the barbarian level, he still could not do it. The gap of 1 level was not easy to overcome. Perhaps it would be possible to merge a special wind-type bloodline into the frost wind blades. Unfortunately, even if he was willing to waste a little of it and choose to swallow the blood of the knife weasel, he could not do it. It had only been 3 months since the last time he swallowed it. He did not meet the requirements to swallow it again. However, he did not need to defeat it. He only needed to restrain it and hold on until Marnell Sidney defeated the barbarian-level Blood Fiend. Bang, bang, bang. The three Blood Fiends flew backward and crashed into the house that was already in ruins. The 5 ice wind blades that Gray slashed out were blocked by Rob Tracy's tentacles. Facing the siege of the 3 Blood Fiends in Gray, Rob Tracy once again blocked the attacks without suffering any damage. Whoosh! He looked in the direction of Gray with a cold expression. The next moment, he actually pounced on Gray quickly. Swish, swish, swish. Gray continuously slashed out ice wind blades to block his opponent's approach. Puff, puff, puff. Several deep scratches appeared on the ground from time to time, and frost spread in all directions. However, it did not affect his opponent's approach. His opponent's figure flashed quickly and dodged every ice wind blade before it could reach him. Pa, pa, pa. Gray used ice wind blades to block his opponent's attacks while retreating quickly. However, the distance between him and his opponent was quickly closing. Cold sweat slid down his forehead. He could imagine the result if a barbarian blood warrior got close to him. I can't let him get close. A strong sense of crisis reminded Gray. With the powerful, mutated Blood Fiend ability, he could still fight with his opponent for a while. However, if his opponent got close to him and he lost the opportunity to use his most powerful attack, he could not even fight. At this point, Gray did not care about the consumption of his blood force. He used the Hurricane Ice Blade. Swish, swish, swish. An icy green whirlwind appeared and dozens of icy green ice wind blades slashed out, covering an arc-shaped area. Wherever they passed, traces of ice appeared on the ground. Swish, swish, swish. Facing the large number of ice wind blades that sealed off a large area, Rob Tracy's face showed a trace of seriousness for the first time. A large number of shadow tentacles appeared from under his body and intertwined with each other, weaving into a large hollow black ball that protected him in the middle. He had just witnessed the power of the Blood Fiend ability. Therefore, even he did not dare to underestimate it. Crack, crack, crack. That was the truth. Under the slashing of these wind blades, a large number of shadow tentacles were cut off, and even more shadow tentacles were quickly frozen. In the end, the ball formed by his shadow tentacles completely turned into a ball of ice. All the shadow tentacles were frozen. Not only that, but there was also a cold air that seeped into his body. His body also started to freeze. I don't know if I hurt him. Gray's face was solemn. He quickly retreated, and at the same time commanded the 3 Blood Fiends to join him. Crack! All of a sudden, a hole appeared in the black ball formed by the shadow tentacles that had been completely frozen. From the hole, a figure with bits of ice on his body shot out, pouncing at Gray with extreme speed. Swoosh! On the short knife, an earthy yellow glow condensed and viciously slashed at Gray's neck. Oh no! Gray, who was retreating, felt his hair stand on end. His back was soaked in cold sweat. A sense of sharpness made his neck feel cold, as if someone was holding a knife to his neck. He forced himself to calm down. The demonic sword in his hand was surrounded by lightning as he blocked the short knife. The next round had begun. His face was full of shock. The short knife, which was about to collide with the demonic sword of thunder, suddenly changed direction and slashed at his neck from another direction. He truly felt the approach of death. Ever since he came to this world, there had never been a time when he was so close to death. Blood spurted wildly as Gray was violently sent flying. As he flew, drops of blood splattered. Under the contrast of the snowflakes, it was incomparably bright red. Boom! With a loud sound, Gray smashed into the house that had already turned into ruins. Large chunks of earth and stone fell from above, burying him alive. Chapter 251. Gray, Viscount Fergus, and Zeroying's expressions changed as they watched Gray crash into the ruins. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Everyone in the Sydney Hill, including Count Smalley, who was not on good terms with Gray, could not help but change their expressions. Although he wanted Gray, who was a huge threat, to die, now was not the time. Without Gray, Rob Tracy would no longer be restrained. Whether he joined forces with Bull to deal with Marnell Sidney or directly attack them, the battle situation would be very disadvantageous. All of them might be left here. Of course, if Gray could exchange a life for a life with Rob Tracy, or if Rob Tracy was unable to fight, he would be very happy to see it happen. It's amazing that a berserker could actually hurt me. A cold smile appeared on Rob Tracy's face as he looked at the bits of ice on his body and his hands that had turned purple from the cold. Although there was only a difference of one realm between a berserker and a berserker, the difference in their combat strength was enormous. Even 5 or 6 berserkers would find it difficult to hurt him. But his opponent had done it, and almost in a one-on-one situation. After all, before he had exchanged blows with his opponent, he had already swept away the 3 berserker blood fiends. At the last moment, he was directly immersed in the cold air and sealed in ice. Fortunately, after being blocked by layers of shadow tentacles, the cold air had been severely weakened. He was able to break free from the shackles of the ice layer and quickly counterattack. What surprised me even more was that he didn't die after being hit by my blade. As he spoke, he suddenly manipulated numerous tentacles and pierced them towards the ruins of the house that Gray had crashed into. He's not dead. Hearing Rob Tracy say that Gray was not dead, Viscount Fergus, Zeroing, and the others all breathed a sigh of relief. But the next moment, they became nervous again because Rob Tracy had already manipulated the shadow tentacles to attack the ruins where Gray was. Boom! Right at this moment, the rubble that buried Gray flew out, and a figure rushed out. It was Gray. On his left arm, his clothes were torn, and there was a deep wound. Bright red blood was flowing out of the wound. At the moment when the dagger was about to slash at his neck, it was already too late to withdraw his sword to block it. Gray could only raise his left arm to block the dagger. This pair of iron arms, inherited from the vicious grade steel-armed ape, was abnormally tough. Even though it was injured, it still managed to block the other party's saber. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Numerous shadow tentacles attacked, and the dense whistling sound made one's scalp tingle. Swish, swish. Gray, who had just escaped from the jaws of death, had a grave expression on his face as he quickly retreated. At the same time, he slashed out several wind blades, freezing and destroying the dozen or so tentacles that were approaching him. However, more tentacles were approaching. Fortunately, the 3 blood fiends that had been swept away finally arrived. Under Gray's command, they immediately formed a meat wall with their bodies to block the shadow tentacles. Even so, there were still many tentacles that broke through the blockade and attacked him as he retreated. Furthermore, besides the copper-armored rhinoceros, the jade lizard and the ox-type blood fiends, which had already suffered several waves of attacks, finally had their skulls exposed. Their brains were destroyed, and they had completely lost contact with Gray. Crack, crack, crack. Gray no longer cared about losing contact with the jade lizard and the ox-type blood fiends. As he retreated, he either blocked the tentacles with wind blades or slashed out with the demonic sword in his hand. However, there were too many tentacles, and he was unable to block some of them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 3 shadow tentacles pierced toward him like spears. Gray blocked one of them with his left arm, but 2 still pierced his abdomen. Puff! Blood splattered as Gray was sent flying. There were 2 circular wounds on his abdomen, and blood was spilling out. Boom! He crashed into a training ground in the village, creating a huge crater in the middle of the training ground. Gray clutched the wound on his abdomen, his face contorted in pain. However, he quickly got up and retreated. The wound on his abdomen was not shallow, nor was it deep enough to be fatal. After all, his defense was inherited from the jade lizard, and it was one of the best among the berserk blood fiends. In the face of the scattered barbarian blood fiends, he was still able to block them. Whoosh! Rob Tracy quickly chased after Gray. He sneered as he looked at Gray, who was bleeding as he retreated. Humph, a dying struggle. According to his estimation, Gray, who had consecutively slashed out too many icy wind blades, could not even fully activate the Blood Fiend ability. In fact, this was the truth. Under normal circumstances, a Berserk Blood Warrior could at least activate the Blood Fiend ability 3 times. However, in order to block the shadow tentacles, Gray had slashed out too many icy wind blades and used too much of his blood energy. The blood energy wasn't enough to stimulate the Blood Fiend's abilities to the greatest extent. Pack! Pack! Gray's figure retreated continuously. He, who could no longer activate the Blood Fiend's abilities to the maximum, could not even stop the other party for a moment. Looking at the other party who was charging at him aggressively, a smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Seeing the smile on Gray's face, Rob Tracy suddenly had a very bad premonition. The next moment, his premonition came true. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A large number of metal blades suddenly whizzed toward him, completely enveloping the area he was in. Puff, puff, puff. In an instant, the area he was in became riddled with holes. Although he had immediately summoned the shadow tentacles to protect himself and dodge to the side, he was still hit by the metal blades. However, he was still inevitably grazed by the metal blade that broke through the shadow's protection. His clothes were torn, and abrasions appeared on his skin. Huff! After a long sigh, Gray stopped retreating. He knew that he was now safe. He saw an old man with thinning hair walking toward him from afar. He was not tall, but at this moment, he gave Gray an extremely imposing feeling. It was as if the old man who was walking toward him was not about 7 meters tall, with a slightly hunched body. Instead, it was a blood fiend with a body length of 7 meters and an extremely huge body. Damn it, how could it be so fast? Drops of blood dripped onto the ground. Rob Tracy's face was gloomy as he looked in the direction of the bull. The 7-meter-long barbarian bull's head had already been separated from its body. Beside it, there was a 10-meter-long giant sword made of metal powder that was slowly collapsing. Obviously, the bull's head should have been cut off by this giant sword made of metal powder. Rob Tracy, what other trump cards do you have? Just use them. Looking at Gray, who was injured but probably not in a fatal condition, Marnell Sidney looked at Rob Tracy with a mocking look in his eyes. Whoosh! Rob Tracy's face was gloomy, and his expression kept changing. The next moment he shouted, "Give up the village and break out." At the same time, he also rushed out of the village. Don't you think it's too late to escape now? Marnell Sidney stomped hard on the ground, and the ground caved in. Every step he took covered a distance of more than 10 meters. After chasing for 100 meters, he turned over and stood in front of Rob Tracy. Blue light surrounded the blade, and he attacked Rob Tracy. Rob Tracy waved his saber to block it. Clang! The two separated as soon as they touched. Then, a black shadow and a sharp metal blade appeared and tangled in the air. The surrounding 100 meters were affected by the aftermath. It's still too difficult, but I still managed to hold on. Looking at the two sides fighting in the distance, Gray could not help but sigh. Even if Rob Tracy's strength was only average among the barbarian blood warriors, it was not something he and the 4 berserk blood fiends could contend against. In just a short moment of fighting, not only was he injured, but 3 of the 4 berserk blood fiends were also killed. It was not an ordinary danger. However, although it was dangerous, he had to do it. If Rob Tracy and the bull joined forces to kill Marnell Sidney, everyone present, including him, would not be able to survive. Even if it was to save himself, he had to do it. Fortunately, in the end, he managed to hold on until Marnell Sidney killed the bull. Gray looked at the place where the Sidney Alliance and the Shadow Serpent were fighting. Retreat. Give up the village. Under the leadership of the purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man, the members of the Shadow Serpent were breaking out of the encirclement. His eyes flashed with coldness. He was not a match for Rob Tracy, but these people, even the 2 berserk blood warriors, the purple-haired man and the short brown-haired man, he did not put them in his eyes. Puff, a member of the Shadow Serpent, who was not weak and had the strength of a berserk blood warrior, felt a chill on his back and instinctively dodged to the side. But before he could move, a sword had already pierced through his back and came out from his chest. Pulling out the sword, Gray looked around and quickly found another member of the Shadow Serpent with the strength of a berserk blood warrior. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Dong, dong, dong. While hunting the members of the Shadow Serpent, Gray did not forget to command the bronze-armored rhinoceros to attack the members of the Shadow Serpent. When encountering a member of the Shadow Serpent, he directly relied on his indestructible body to crash into them. Even Rob Tracy, who had the strength of a berserk blood warrior, could only leave a shallow wound on the bronze-armored rhinoceros when his power was scattered. Not to mention, the strongest members of the Shadow Serpent were berserk blood warriors. Pung, pung, pung. The members of the Shadow Serpent who were hit by the rhinoceros spat out blood and were sent flying, accompanied by the sound of bones breaking. Some tried to attack the bronze-armored rhinoceros with weapons, but they were sent flying along with their weapons. Boom! In the distance, the battle between Marnell Sidney and Rob Tracy had already come to an end. Marnell Sidney condensed a several-meter-long sword and pierced towards Rob Tracy. Puff! The several-meter-long sword pierced through the shadow tentacles and stabbed into Rob Tracy's body, sending Rob Tracy flying and crashing into many walls. Poochie! Rob Tracy was nailed to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. Clearly, he was seriously injured. Marnell Sidney rushed over and prepared to kill his opponent with a single slash. Hula! However, right at that moment, a sudden change occurred. In the woods outside the village, several huge plant tentacles appeared and pulled out the sword on Rob Tracy's body. They swept up the seriously injured Rob Tracy and quickly flew out of the village.